Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the In Practice Alumni Symposium. My name is Julia Jamrozik. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Architecture, and I'm also the chair of the Public Programs Committee. The committee, which is comprised this year of Charles Davis, Erkan Oze, Sora Beck, and Emmanuel Frampong Buma, we thought that the symposium, which could feature some of our outstanding graduates from both the departments of architecture and planning, would be a valuable addition to our series this year as we investigate different approaches and different ways to practice. Joyce Huang, who is the Associate Chair of Architecture, Sora Beck, and myself have planned this event with help from many other faculty and staff, including Greg Delaney, Rachel Tiemann, Patty Donhauser, Jessica Naish, Barb Carlson, Bruce Mayakovsky, as well as Doug, who is recording the session right now in the back. And I want to thank everyone who was involved in the planning for your help and for your contributions. I also want to thank the Sidney Grouse Memorial Fund for sponsoring this event, as well as sponsorship from the UB Office of Alumni Engagement. Thank you for that. Before I hand over the mic to Joyce to give you a little bit more background about the event, I want to just briefly go over the schedule for this afternoon. And so the schedule we've set up is made up of basically 3 parts. The first part will consist of presentations by our speakers. First, we will have presentations by the architecture speakers, then a small break, and then presentations by the planning speakers. Then for the second part, we'll ask all of our alumni to come and join us at the front. And we'll have a panel discussion with questions from the audience. So I ask that you hold off on your questions until that part. Then we'll take another short break and we'll rearrange the room, and we'll have a series of kind of breakout tables where students and the audience in general can ask specific questions to our invited alumni. So that's the afternoon as we've structured it. Thank you very much for being here, and I hand the mic over to Joyce.
Great. Hey, great. Thank you, Julia. So welcome to the 2019 Sidney Grouse Memorial Symposium. This is a kind of annual public programs event that has been generously sponsored, as Julia mentioned, by the Sidney Grouse Memorial Fund. So I'd like to thank again Sidney's family and friends, and especially to her mother, Lori Duckstein, for her dedicated support to this school. And again, also thank you to Patty Starr in the Office of Alumni Engagement. And just to explain, most of you will remember this, but in past years, the Sidney Grouse Memorial Lecture has typically featured one single lecture. Last year it was Eva Frank-Gilbert. And this year we wanted to change the format to bring together some of our more prominent, well, maybe not prominent, but at least the kind of emerging young alumni from our school who are doing very interesting, very diverse things in the field. And so we wanted to make this an event that could celebrate the work that our young alumni are doing, and to bring that to the school and to connect alumni to students. So before we begin, I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about Sidney Grouse. So Sidney Grouse was a freshman architecture student who suddenly and tragically passed away after her freshman year. When she was at UB, I had the privilege of being the freshman studio coordinator when she was a freshman, and I taught along with Chris Romano. And as a student, I would say that she was incredibly joyful, very happy, very energetic. She was one of these students who could change the mood of the room as soon as when you entered the room. She was the kind of person that sort of her kind of happiness, I guess, just sort of spread across Parker Studio through her time when she was here. And I think one of the things that struck me the most about her was, and this is something I still think about today, is how even as a freshman, she was able to forge this very interesting identity for herself. So of course in architecture school, as everybody knows, when you're a freshman, you immediately start learning that you need to start wearing black and gray, right? So that's what happens, and the freshmen are starting to wear black and gray, but Sidney had a very different take on things. She actually started to wear more purple. she was intensifying the color purple all around to the extent, not just in her clothes, but also in changing the light fixtures and using purple duct tape. So there was purple duct tape all over her studio in freshman year. And that was quite, I'm sort of telling this anecdote because, on the one hand, it might seem like a very small thing, but I think something like that, like something where you see somebody expressing their sense of individuality and this kind of exuberant spirit, this is exactly the kind of thing that we find, I think, in students in their early years that become some of our most innovative and creative and trailblazing students and alumni in the future. So I think Sydney's spirit and memory really represents this vision that we have in educating future leaders in architecture and planning. And so I think it's only appropriate that we celebrate her memory with the alumni that we have in the room today. So as I mentioned, the aim of the symposium is to bring together this diverse group of alumni who are doing very interesting, provocative work. They're gaining traction in their fields. There's a lot of interesting work to discuss. And I think we purposefully chose people doing very different things so that as students, you can see the kind of different paths that you might be able to take as you start thinking about your future. It's not necessarily something, architecture and planning are not necessarily fields where you kind of go in and there's only one way to do things. There's many different ways to do things. And I hope the alumni that we've selected for today's panels will show that. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the 3 architecture alumni just all together, and then after the break, Sohrab Beck will introduce the planning alumni. So for architecture, Maciej Kaczynski, here at the end, is the project leader in Studio Gang's Chicago office, where he specialized in cultural, educational, adaptive reuse projects. He currently leads the design team for the Beloit College Powerhouse, which is now under construction. And this is a project that will transform a shuttered coal-fired power plant into a student center of wellness and fitness. Prior to joining Studio Gang, Maciej taught at the University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. Quardine Lewis Allen, over there, in the middle, is the founder and CEO of the nonprofit youth creative agency and innovation hub Maid in Brownsville, which provides a gateway for young people in his native Brownsville community to access education, technology, and mentorship, and to tackle underrepresentation in STEAM professions and cyclical poverty, as well as to address the need for place-based community revitalization. He's an Emerging Leaders Fund recipient of Clenell Foundation, Cranes Under 40, Forbes Under 30, and many other awards, so very impressive. When he was here, everybody knew him as Q. I don't know if anybody still calls you that. Okay. And Gabrielle Printz here is a co-founder of the Feminist Architecture Collaborative, also known as F Architecture, a spatial research and design office based in New York City. Her practice has designed exhibitions, built scenographies for protests, organized a delegation of indigenous midwives at UN Habitat, produced performances with artists on the streets of Amman, and exhibited their research on the objects and interiors of contemporary virginity at a gallery in Prague. She's a co-editor of Beyond Patronage, which most of you hopefully will remember, and her current writing and work is gaining quite a lot of traction. She was recently published in Harvard Design Magazine and other places. So these are just very, very short bios of our speakers. Their longer bios are online, so I hope you'll read them and get to know them as they're here. So great, thank you. And we'll start with Maciej. Do you need this, or do you want, you have that? Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, where do I go?
Here.
Oh, easy. Pardon me for a second, this will look like a moment of vanity. It's not actually exactly the opposite of my intent. I think well, firstly, thank you, everyone, for welcoming me back. It's always a pleasure to see this school, to see this place that I call home, and certainly the place where I started my architectural career. I'm going to jump in. There's only 15 minutes, and that's a bit not too much time. So how many of you have been on Instagram before and kind of rolled your eyes at that one person that just posts everything that looks super beautiful and super glam and is just seemingly living a perfect life? And I'm not quite interested in that side of things exactly. I'm a little bit more interested in the the more messy side. So I would say that architectural presentations and talks and even exhibitions run the risk of becoming a little bit overly glamorized or I'm going to need that in a second, or becoming too much like producing an unrealistic image of what's actually happening. And I think that it's a lot more interesting if you look underneath a little bit further. And so I wasn't quite sure how to just give that point across, and I didn't want to use someone else's work to give that point because that's rude. So I just made myself the subject of that. And I think that this is a lot more, I'm a lot more interested in talking candidly about how things work and how frankly, they don't work, and when things don't go according to plan. Here are some intro slides for some of my biography, if you will, time that I've spent in different places. Note that if you look closely in each of these, you can find a place where I actually lived across each of these settings. So anyway, notice that I spent 5 years at Buffalo, which was due to a year-long foray into engineering. So again, here's an exhibit of something not going quite according to plan. At some point, I realized that actually architecture was probably the correct choice all along when I found myself spending more time drafting my force diagrams and actually doing the calculations. So I said, okay, let's go back to architecture. So during grad school, if you're watching the dates, note that I went directly from undergrad to grad school. Eager to take the next step in my education, and certainly by the end of grad school, I was super eager to jump into practice. And then the world economy melted. So you can probably already predict that this isn't going to go quite according to plan. So next step, upon graduation, was actually one of the lucky ones. I had plenty of friends who couldn't find work for months. I was offered a teaching gig at Michigan, and myopically, I was actually quite disappointed in myself. I hadn't found a way into a major city or into a major office or into a high-profile office. So you can already tell I'm going to try to be very, very candid here. I hope I will use that word again. So I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to move to Michigan. I wanted to learn to build. Nonetheless, I was still very thankful to actually even have work. So at Michigan, I was tasked with, I spent a lot of time right in this space. I was tasked with both teaching and co-directing the fabrication lab. And I certainly spent many hours with CNC machines in grad school, but I distinctly remember entering this space for the first time and thinking, oh no, they think I know all this stuff. I'm a total imposter. And it felt like that for a while, and sometimes you just make it work. And I certainly had many bumps along the way, but time goes on, you figure it out. So the first year I was dedicated to just getting my footing and balancing the lab with the classroom and being forced to overcome my insecurities and about my own perceived lack of experience and the similarity in age between myself and my students. In retrospect, it's clear that my time teaching reinvigorated my passion and curiosity for architecture and design. I had entered grad school with my own preconceived notions of what a graduate education is supposed to be. I felt obligated to check off boxes rather than explore my own curiosities, which is tragic. Eventually, it sunk in that there was no one at Michigan to tell me what to do or how to do it, or to even evaluate me for that matter. So initially this was terrifying, and then slowly it was exhilarating and very liberating. Yes, of course, I was responsible to my students and to the school, but I could scratch any curious itch or pursue any avenue of research that I wanted, of course, through the classroom. It was truly an empowering time, and it really, I don't exaggerate, a greater education than my time at the GSD. After the first year, the classroom was transformed into a responsibility to a resource. Feeling empowered, I found some passions in keeping with my curriculum. I became fascinated by the geometric definition of volume and aggregate assemblies. If I wanted to learn to build, then why not do it myself? So this is actually, here are two quick views into some early projects. This was done in collaboration with Monica Ponce de Leon. This was, if we're going to be honest, was intended to stand up and could not on its own. And you can see over here that there are some aluminum frames in there that are doing some work. Turns out, by the way, the correct answer is lots of double curvature produces a self-sustaining shell, if you're curious. So this was, it certainly had its successes, but also its failures. It was a great lesson in time management, as if we don't get that lesson frequently enough. We have to relearn it every year. And also, of course, just some very technical lessons. Again, things that I didn't even know that I could do, being put into a situation where you had to do them, and you figure it out. That kind of also branched into some other research that became more literally volumetric with self-supporting stonework. And you can, of course, see a similarity between these two. So I want to say, well, I should add also that my time teaching was of course, as you can already tell, very material and process-oriented, which I warmly welcomed, and frankly, that was much more akin to what I was sort of raised with, how I was raised with architecture. That was my education over here. After about 3 years of teaching, which I eventually did grow to love, I began to feel a little bit impatient with the scalar limitations and also the limitations of impermanence for the work that was being produced. And I wanted to find something that was not just going to be a display for a couple of minutes, maybe after I don't know, a class finishes up, or maybe even an exhibition. I had this desire to find a place to make these things much more permanent and build up in scale. So, I found a co-conspirator. I co-taught a course with fellow maker Katie Newell at Michigan, and this attempted to apply the lessons of the fabrication lab and to take a whole classroom and put everyone toward one singular goal. And why not, of course, do that in Detroit, where, God bless Detroit, one of the few places where you can put a project like this together and you don't even need a building permit. So, my last year teaching, I was awarded, Michigan has this incredible faculty awards program where faculty can apply to and are granted on an annual basis, I assume it still exists, a grant for research. And of course, it was a question every year. Are you applying to RTM? Are you applying to research the making? And of course, everyone did. And so my last year there, I was granted that, which was great. And I, of course, wanted to focus on some of those questions that we've already been reviewing. But I also, again, was looking for something a little bit more permanent. And so this is really just in some ways, I'm very, very proud of this work. I regard it as sort of a culmination of all the lessons that had happened before now being applied to a singular branch of research that was, frankly, a tremendous confidence builder. Before this, I don't think I had any, again, I didn't have any idea that I could actually finally assemble something into a full-blown solo exhibition and do it entirely on my own. I did not have that confidence when I walked into Michigan, and so that was the moment when I said, okay, I think I can actually return to my original goals. I think I can now move into practice. I want to do that, and that's the next step. Rogers Park, north neighborhood of Chicago, if anybody's wondering. So, upon arrival to Studio Gang, I will admit that I didn't have the smoothest landing into practice. I felt confident in my skill set and the things that I had learned, but became increasingly aware of how little I knew about capital A architecture. And that was the intent. So in many ways, I was starting from scratch. And I no longer was providing instruction, which I had grown used to, and was actually, at this point, that I had to relearn to become a student. And yes, at times I had to just be a good listener, and at times I had to swallow my pride and work with a team. It was very different in that way. So here's of course, our Chicago office. I have a lot of pride in this space, not just because I work there and I love this office, but also because it's the Polish National Alliance building, which is the financial cornerstone, or was the financial cornerstone for the Polish community in Chicago many years ago. So I did enjoy the return to drawing, though, by the way, something that I did relatively little of during my time in Michigan, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but very little drawing. Lots of writing at Michigan, very little drawing. Lots of making at Michigan, very little drawing. I reveled working in a larger team toward a common goal. I adored the learning and the testing that you do, the testing that you do with experts and engineers, the people that really, really know this stuff. I think that sometimes us architects think that we know all these things, and then you talk to the people that are the true experts in their fields, and you realize, like, actually you're just scratching the surface, and you are, in some ways, really just you are the generalist, and you're trying to combine all these lessons into one common goal across all of these disciplines. So the model shop over at Studio Gang was not the thing that I was used to. It was not these immaculate constructions that had 0.005 of an inch tolerance, but rather were instead very scrappy and improvised, and they were used instead to be testing ideas. They were used to iterate and communicate prototypical ideas. And of course, we still do that. We do it all the time. There are very few people at Studio Gang who are the model makers. Everyone's making their own model. You're getting in there, you're getting your hands dirty, you're figuring it out. There's a very can-do kind of spirit. I found lightness at Studio Gang. Very literally, there was more laughter inside the office than I was accustomed to in academia, but not you people, you're all very pleasant. Designs and ideas did not need to be verbose or complicated, and that's just the world that I think I had become accustomed to at Michigan. In fact, actually, the brevity and the clarity of a design idea kept it strong through the many phases of a project. It is under constant attack, and you need to reinforce it. So really, it was at this moment also that I began to become. When I came into Buffalo, I was exhilarated by the idea that you could go from drawing to building, like drawing from something, and then from that design make it reality, and you communicate this through a drawing. And I was just fascinated by that, and wanted to. That's always been the goal, is to figure out how to do that. And this was a moment when I actually began to do that. This is a drawing from Writers Theater. This is a north of Chicago, and to go from that to mock-ups to testing to actually installation was exhilarating. I can't tell you how this moment was just the most liberating feeling. And this, by the way, is actually, it's technically, just to nerd out for a second, is actually holding up this balcony, those wooden pieces, they are acting in tension. And the idea here is that this is a theater, so counterintuitively, right? A theater wants to be enclosed. It's a very controlled space. You don't want any light in, you don't want any sound in. And at the same time, though, you still want to make it a gesture to the community and welcome the community. And so how do you balance these things? You have literally a black box and also an open box. So what do? You want to open up those boxes where you can and provide an entrance to the public. And of course, the wooden screen was a great opportunity to do something materially and technically innovative, but also to provide a sign to the community that, come here, you're welcome here. So I'm going to go through a couple of, we've already gone through one, of course, but I'm going to show you a couple of other projects that I've worked on, and also one that I'm working on currently. This was a great lesson in lyric opera, in actually just, again, being a little bit humble and realizing that the experts in the fields are wizards. And this is a photo of us doing some mock-ups with Threshold Acoustics, who we frequently collaborate with. And we were tasked with producing a concert shell that was going to improve the concert experience for everybody at Lyric Opera in Chicago. And the stipulation being, of course, that it could be something that could be taken down quite quickly and reassembled quite quickly. And so we learned very early on that, well, how do you do that? You have mass. Mass responds to provides a great, I don't know the techniques of it. Again, I'm not that expert. It provides a great diffusive surface, but it also can help reflect certain frequencies of sound very well. The problem with mass is that it doesn't transport well. And so we were kind of spinning our wheels for a bit, and then at some point in one of these sessions, Threshold Acoustics says to us, well, there is this other way you can do that. You can, in lieu of mass, you can go with rigidity. We kind of looked up and we said, go on. And we kind of just went off to the races at that point. And I love this particular photo because it's just, I love things that look like they're in the process of being made. They're halfway through. And this is certainly that. And this was also a great moment where we really were humbled by the expertise of Ravenswood Studios, who did an incredible job with the actual fabrication. And it was a little bit difficult, I will say at this point, to kind of let that go. I kept wanting to jump in and grab a hammer, grab a whatever. In this case, maybe also a mouse, because there was a lot of CNC cutting. this also, that was, I think, those two projects were some great prep to even build up further in scale, and this is the design that we have for the extension at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And if you've been there, if you know anything about it, the museum was really kind of built up in a piecemeal fashion, and it did have a master plan originally, which you can get the sense of on this side over here, and that was intended to be sort of the entirety of the campus. That wasn't to be. It actually happened in a much more ad hoc fashion, and consequently it did leave some spaces open in the museum that were kind of dead ends. They weren't connecting. So our proposal was to actually take that space and provide a connection, reconnect all these spaces that had been lost, and provide a reinvigorated experience, and also, of course, providing this new center, which is a center for education and is intended to be a center for students and for children, and therefore is also hopefully an inspiring space to be in. So the part that I spent most time on this project, and this is a huge team that was working on it, is working on it. I believe they just broke ground. I'm not on this anymore, but I was working primarily on the facade, and in this case we had to figure out, well, how to make it. And we did want to be respectful of course, the materials that are used on this museum, and on the opposite side, the opposite axis, if you will, there's that material is Milford pink granite. And so we very early on decided that actually that's probably the appropriate material to be used here. We don't want to lose that. That's a really important ingredient. But how do we make it work with this space and this geometry? And well, you break it up into a million pieces. And this was a work that had been done to actually make this into a test piece. And mock-ups, if you've spent any time doing mock-ups are the second best thing to the actual thing. This is the moment where you really get to test ideas, and you hopefully build in to the mock-up a lot of questions that might not necessarily be the thing itself might not look so pretty because it has lots of ideas or questions built into it, so it can look more like a Frankenstein. But in so doing, you find a solution. So you can see over here, for example, were tests for different finishes, and in addition to finishes, there were questions about the actual buildability of it. So to wrap up here, I want to show you, this is the one that I'm working on currently. This is the Beloit College Powerhouse. This is a powerhouse, which this is a perfect view to look at it from, because you can see the college in the back, you can see the powerhouse in the front, and of course in the furthest foreground you can see the Rock River. This is just across the border from Illinois into Wisconsin, and Beloit College had the foresight to, when this building became decommissioned, said, that's an asset, we need to get that. And so they came to us and said, how do you envision this? And so this is chock full of program that you wouldn't even necessarily typically put together. There's some pieces of program in here that might be acoustically very sensitive, the lecture hall, and also very acoustically productive, like a running track, and to put those things in such close proximity introduces some challenges. That's just one piece of it, but there's a lot of ingredients in this that will make it into a center of student wellness, and also a place for fitness, for wellness, for health. And we kind of we keep joking in the office that this is no longer going to be a space that belches smoke from burning coal, but rather it'll now burn calories. I know it's kind of hokey, but and just a couple views of how we're envisioning some of these spaces. This photo is from a couple months ago, right after it was finished being cleaned. Yes, that is clean actually for a power plant. And this is how we're envisioning it. And so there are some places where we're practicing a very light touch, and others where it's much, much more intensive. There are many other floors being added. Currently in this building, there's steel being added. We're putting in steel and composite decking, and so there's a lot more floors. The building itself, the original building, is kind of like an armature that's going to hold a lot more program. And it is interesting to spend, to creatively reinterpret how to take a space that was intended to be occupied by machines and then now find a way to put people in it. Another view of from the roadside. And I do want to finish up just on this last image, which shows you some of that more process-oriented work where, again, it's not a clean thing. There are many fits and starts. There are moments when you have a design, you lose a design, and you have to defend a design. but it's still invigorating to have, this is a very common thing to have in our office, is to have a wall where you put something up, someone asks a question later on, like, oh, what were we doing there? You grab it off the wall, this is what we had, this is what we were thinking. This is kind of a place for things to grow. It's very much a living wall. Yes, of course, we have walls that are also for display, but these walls are the ones that really show off, I think, the life of a project as it's kind of developing and living and learning. This is a little bit outdated, so now, because we are in construction, a lot of those things have been solved, so you wouldn't necessarily find this in our office currently, but this is a very common sight in the office. And I think, hopefully, that's right around 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, hello. All right. Brilliant. Thank you. Cool. Pointer. How's everybody doing? Good. Awesome. I say Buffalo was some of the best years of my life. I used the time, I think, productively in the sense that you don't know what you don't know. And so I learned a lot of the technical things that I needed to dive into the provocations that I cared about. And those types of things stemmed from growing up in a neighborhood called Brownsville, and we have the highest concentration of public housing in the nation. We have the highest rate of every chronic illness that you can think of in Brooklyn, the highest incarceration rate, all these kind of things. The provocation really came when I lost my uncle to gun violence around the corner in front of this vacant lot, and I grew that association around vacant spaces to loss, and that thinking through that. I landed at architecture. I landed here, and then it led me to the GSD, where I decided to dive deeper into that provocation around what does that vacant lot mean in space? What does some things to activate that actually mean for the people who live around it? What does engaging in spaces in our backyards productively, particularly when we have maybe been disconnected or disenfranchised from the ownership of those spaces mean? So I went to GSD, and I was like, I gotta talk to some people about this. I found this organization that was already there called the Social Change and Activism Group, or SOCA, which started as a Student of Color Association. And then I became the chair for like 2 years, and we, along with a friend of mine, Shelby Doyle, we started a publication in partnership with Trays, a journal at the GSD called Design Opportunity, which was a compendium of projects in and around the school of faculty and staff and students, essentially in the vein of like small scale, big change. And one of these projects, I was really inspired by Design Corps as a Swiss Army bus shelter, right? When you think about the stakeholders of space, of a community, and they know that they need something like as simple as a bus shelter so that people aren't out in the cold, but then they know that having that thing there can do other things like be a planter and transition and be a play device for young kids while they're waiting, or and all these kinds of things. But the way to get to this is actually, like doing the hard work of talking to people and actually listening. And that was really big for me as a step in the journey to kind of get back to my neighborhood. Whereas I said, this was one of these things that I learned when I got back, is the highest disconnected youth number, which is young people that are not in school, not working in Brooklyn. And as 1 in 4. And then the other thing, when I was in these spaces, I was always like one of 2 black people in the room in predominantly white spaces, and Perkins Eastman, 600 people, 2 black people. And the things that we were working on also weren't things that I cared about, like a Saudi Arabian campus for a prince to make a college campus, or I love the elders, but like renovating bathroom modules in the elder care center. I was just shake some stuff up, right? So I decided to try to actually think about the things that I did care about, right? And it led me to like investigating these numbers of why there's a lack of diversity around these professions, these STEAM professions: science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Some say STEM. I like the A because it's arts and architecture sometimes. I think it got included. So I started Maid in Brownsville, which is a nonprofit youth creative agency where we teach and employ young people in digital media, arts, and tech, and really getting them to think about their pathways to employment in these sectors, but also thinking about their community as a benefit and wanting to give back to it, because I think a lot of what happens in place is that you get a little bit of change and you want to leave, and the brain drain happens, and then the same systemic issues of place and concentrated poverty kind of go on cyclically for some time. So what we do is we train these young people to be civic leaders and give them tools and design that will advance their professions. We built out a space for them called the Labs at Maid in Brownsville, which is a space to showcase their wares, like they're producing in the apparel studio branded campaigns for anti-violence and healthy active living, or the graphic design studio is thinking about a street campaign for Beyond Belmont, to encourage foot traffic along the corridor and these kinds of things, and then they're able to sell those things, and a little fab lab and media and all this kind of stuff. Right? We get it. This building really small, or really Parker. And I guess. Pedagogy, because we're in a school. There's a brilliant woman named Antoinette Carroll out in St. Louis, who after the Mike Brown incident, she started talking about this idea of equity-centered community design as an offshoot of human-centered design that really encompasses things like the histories of places and conversations around healing, and on top of human-centered design, to build a rapport of equity and empathy, really empathy building with the stakeholders of these varied problems that we have in our communities. And so there's a brilliant field guide that, if you so care to kind of like look at it, it has questions around how to ask and engage people in your community. But it's Creative Reaction Lab's website, and you can download it. It's free, I think. I don't know. I bought 2 books. I needed it. I needed it in my life. So, but one of these main things that allows one to do this is active listening, and active listening is really, for me, not waiting for someone to shut up so you're going to say what you're going to say anyway, but actually like looking them in the eye and like understanding where they're coming from and building empathy and then responding commensurate to what it is that they're saying, right? So that's what we teach our young people in our program. So here are some examples. Ooh, this font is wrong. that's offensive to me as a designer. Lessons in active listening in equity-centered community design, co-created by the youth of Brownsville Community Justice Center and Community Solutions and private public partners and politicians and all these other stakeholders that you have to say when you're doing this thing, because it's co-authoring. It's not, this, top-down approach. It's built from the bottom up. So very quickly, I'm doing pretty well on time, I think. So we were listening to our neighbors in various ways, right? And this, when I got back to Brownsville, I joined an organization called Community Solutions, the Brownsville Partnership, and they had this idea for a summit called the Hope Summit, and we got about 150 people, residents and city agencies and business owners and things in a room to talk about, envision what the community can look like if we put our minds to, I guess, creating a space for community design. And then produced this document that I had to compile all this data for, which essentially broke out themes that went as granular as like the words said by people at this table, and then cataloging or creating a taxonomy to catalog every kind of like conversation. And the thing that came up predominantly, or the most, was around kind of like physical environment things. So it's like urban design, land use, infrastructural development, preservation of landmarks. And so these are some of the things that were being said really loud at these tables, usually by Miss Betty. She's just like loud at any occasion. It was probably really, okay, bring back retail, right? More diverse retail, no more having to leave Brownsville for services and shopping. So we were actively listening to them through this process, and were able to respond to a city RFP to activate a vacant lot with a retail market. And the lead architect for the site work and these kiosks was Or Design and Tech, and Maid in Brownsville. This was like our first commission to do a mural with the kids. We worked on that as well as the RFP itself. So we worked collectively with kids that were paid to work on both the site work and the adjacent walls. And let's see if we can do this. Boom, 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 boom. And then we activated it for 3 years. It was a temporary lot activation. It needed to be able to, everything needed to be able to come up and leave the site because of the city-owned lot. And so retrofitted shipping containers that were used for food incubators, for food businesses that actually went on to become brick and mortar spaces. Maid in Brownsville, our organization had a kiosk there. That's me. That was our first employee. But those are the types of, this was the first kind of like activation that we did. Then we were listening to a different set of neighbors who were living in this development. Brownsville from the 40s to the 70s, Robert Moses, just like, he started something that just tore through the neighborhood. Because the reason we have the highest concentration of public housing, about a third of the neighborhood was slated as a site for urban renewal, so they cleared blocks and blocks, and then it didn't finish because they ran out of money in the 70s, so they just left those vacant lots. But we had the high density of Tower in the Park, NYCHA buildings, New York City Housing Authority buildings, and as a response to that, this development named Marcus Garvey Village Apartments, who was designed by Kenneth Frampton, who teaches at Columbia, who wrote the book on modernism that I had to read here. He designed this with MoMA and the Urban Development Corporation, which is now Empire State Development, as low-rise, high-density housing, as an antithesis to the tower in the park. And typologically, it felt successful, and they talk about it in schools and things. It's a famous project, but if you talk to these young people who grew up in it, there's room for improvement. And so we talked to them. The developer who bought the development was interested in, it's this stuff here. This is Market Square Village, was interested in engaging young people and reconceiving some of the larger empty lots. So we did something like an urban planning studio. They looked at, this is a map of like where they felt safe walking, which is an interesting thing to try to map, right? If you think about spatial justice, spatial equity, this entire thing is their community, and the blue is where they felt safest, right around where their development is, and then they don't like the kids that live in Brownsville houses, and they fight sometimes with these kids. So the red is where they won't walk, and our office is up here, so we had to bring our programming to them. So that, just like to have an understanding of kind of like the things, the systems that they're disconnected from because of kind of like arbitrary boundaries of the built environment, like the name of a set of buildings. It's a very something to study. So this is a lot that they identified in that safe blue area that they wanted to. We were listening together, and they wanted to create a retail market, or a youth clubhouse. And so this is some of that. They wanted to be entrepreneurs. They wanted to teach each other skills. They actually showed the plan to Kenneth Frampton at Columbia. Kenneth said, you aren't thinking big enough, and we told him we don't have a big enough budget, so so he just didn't get it. So but that's the thing about like working in an architecture firm, I wanted to see the results tomorrow, and so this was built the following year with the plans that the young people came up with. So now they use this space for performances, and there was a sewing class in there last week, and somebody's coming and teaching woodworking and electrical. Yeah. All right. Fester. So this is what one of these streets in Brownsville looks like. It's called Belmont. It's the third. It has the third highest tenant turnover and vacancy rate in Brownsville. This is what it looks like today. This was back in the 40s when it was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. And those are the towers in the back, one of the larger developments that were. So we were actively listening to our neighbors and trying to understand, what would revitalize the corridor, and together with some students at SVA and a bunch of partners, which you can see here, and their roles in this kind of like campaign creation. Like someone's good at writing grants, someone's good at making renderings, someone's good at like outreaching to local community partners. All these organizations got together to think about how to do corridor revitalization. There's a style guide. We worked on a street festival, advertising annually, getting community partners along the corridor, businesses involved to subsidize like these street activities that we were working around. And then we talked to more people. So we had kids out there with tablets and gift cards to a local business, say, hey, fill out this survey with me, and then we gave that information back to people in briefback sessions to get the understanding of what people thought about the corridor, what could be improved, did they feel safe there at night, and surprisingly, what we thought a lot of the assumptions that we had were wrong, and that's why it's important to talk to people, because people would come out at night if there was reason to come out, but all the businesses were closing at 7 o'clock. So, but yeah, the largest thing that we were learning were they wanted more entrepreneurship opportunities, more shops and things of that nature. We also did a pop-up on the street for about 6 months. We got a storefront and just like had people come in and write on our walls and stuff. Like, what do you want to see here? What's your superpower? What can this space or a space like this do for you in your community? We did this like art installation thing where we asked a series of questions, and they grabbed a piece of yarn at one end of the wall that was their age, and then they answered the questions as they went along. I hope I explained that well, but that's what it looks like. So what job do you have now? What do you want to be doing, and what's keeping you from getting there? What business would you open tomorrow if you had all of the resources in the world? And now that's color coded, and that's information that we digitized via a Google form. Keep it simple, but we're now able to use that data to inform our programming and these types of things. Is this the last one? Let me see if it has to be the last one. It should. So that corridor, this was all around this Belmont corridor, right? The same one that used to be popping back in the day, but now. When they built, all the black is the public housing. And when they built them, they cut off these streets that used to go through, and so they left these dead ends. And so the young people, after all of this kind of like gathering of information, decided that they wanted this to be a pedestrian plaza. And so we worked with partners, the DOT art program, and they designated it a plaza. And now we've been using it for all those street festivals that we've been advertising within the neighborhood, making sure that it's activated. So what's the next step from that? I've been very interested in, like, I don't know if folks have seen this, the array of things, and I don't know, it's in Chicago. But it's a way of putting sensors in public and getting information about the environment on like light poles and telephone booths and things of that nature. You can test air quality and the sensitivity of light and all these types of things. There's another project called Benchmark where there's sensors in the bench that track movement, and if somebody's getting close to it, how long that engagement is, of just, are they there to just like figure out what it is? Are they actually interacting with it? The understanding of the spatial occupancy and how people can are using urban entourage, essentially, is something that's, and all this stuff, I would warn you that it can border on the big brother, and you want to be careful in implementing this stuff in your communities, right? But there's something to be said about having that data, and that I'm doing a residency now at NYU this semester at the interactive telecommunications program at Tisch. It's called a Something in Residence SIR program. They're very weird over there. To actually develop these tools for some of the projects that we've been working on. So one of them being, this is called a friendship bench. It was designed by Dr. Nixon Chibanda in Zimbabwe, Dixon Chibanda. There we go. And it's essentially in a place where you don't have access to mental health, and you're dealing with depression, right? Just to have somebody out on a bench sitting there whenever you need them, is a space of refuge. A professional, not just anyone, a professional that you can talk to, is a space that's needed in communities that are dealing with trauma and dealing with loss or dealing with a number of different things. So this was something that helped to curb depression in Zimbabwe. So we, with Brownsville Community Justice Center and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and my students at City College, when I was teaching there, I just finished teaching there, I was teaching there for 2.5 years. We designed some friendship benches and stuff with some that are interactive, and you can like, they are like seesaws, and then there was another project that came out of that work with these Osborne puzzle. You put them together. I think there's a thing here. Yeah, you put them together, they make a stage, you take them apart, and they're these discrete objects that can be used for recreation and exercise, and like kids just being dope in public, and adults also, because you need a couple people to move them around, and it's around collaboration and interaction. So what does it mean to actually track the movement and the migration of all of these things in public space, in the activation of our communities, so that we know if they're not doing well, we need to get rid of them, right? Like that's the problem with a lot of the top-down stuff. They'll put something, and then nobody tracks anything, and it stays there for too long, and they don't know when to remove it, right? That's the Kenneth Frampton problem, I suppose. But I love him. He's great. He's great. All right. I think that's all I got. Thank you. Thank you.
Am I amplified? Okay. Hi, it's nice to be back here. I thought it would be weird, but I've never been in this building before, so it's fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my kind of path through academia into what I do now. And so Buffalo isn't my sort of origin point. Sorry, I'm going to pull up my notes here. But it's the kind of middle child in my degrees. I started actually down Main Street at Canisius, and I have a background in political science and art history, something that for me ended up taking me into architecture. And then after UB, I went to Columbia to do also architecture, but not quite, in a program they call Critical, Curatorial, and Conceptual Practices in Architecture, which is a 2-year degree program. And that's where I met my partners, a Feminist Architecture Collaborative, which I'll talk about a little later. So we're also going to start with my headshot, which is only nominally a headshot. It's something I submitted a little bit late in the absence of something more legitimate, but it's it's a Snapchat filter of my face onto my face, made into a 3D mesh, and then made into a 2D pattern, and then folded back up into a mask, and I put on lashes and my nose ring, a Halloween costume. So that's me, designed, and I want to talk about sort of what I do, because I do think of myself as an architect, even though what I'm going to show you may not register as architecture, but I thought I would kind of break it down into the kind of components of what that is for me. So primarily it's research, design, writing, but also editing and work. So work is its own thing that supports these other things, but also involves them too. And I think it's important to acknowledge the other forms of labor that you might have to take on in order to do alternative practice, where you're designing not buildings, but maybe these other things, and maybe there's a fee and maybe there's not. Or that give you time to write or to do research. So some of the gigs I've had have been in architecture, in architectural publications, doing consulting for a tech startup that started an architecture firm, doing communications for an architecture studio, which is what I do now, and then also teaching, which is what I started doing here. And then a lot of other things are ushered in to sort of support that work, to give it an air of legitimacy, to maybe pay for it, but maybe not. And all that enables the kind of more exciting stuff, what I get starry-eyed over. And those are maybe reduced into kind of meta topics of bodies, territory, and technology. Not technology as this device in my hand, but the kind of interfaces between people and power and capital. So maybe by that statement you'll understand that this is not just about the kind of like object of the body or the spatial condition of territory, but a kind of critique of those things as well. And I'm going to start with a project from Buffalo about bodies, which was formative for me in that it kind of sets up a way of working now that I pursue with architecture. But begins in a kind of critique about architecture. So I was looking at standards for dimensioning a kind of universal or average body, and looking at what those what those measurements were, and the kind of bodies and then spaces that they ended up producing. So these are the Neufert figures. I'll also shout out to Modular, the Vitruvian Man, divine proportions and such. So I wanted to admit the specific body into this terrain as a consideration of space making, but also representation in a certain way. So I actually surveyed people that I know, got measurements, made a script that generated a flat pattern that then became a kind of built volume, a body, an architectural body of sorts. So that became an installation. This is my final review. I have a series of photos actually from my time at Buffalo and beyond too, of just being sprawled out after one of these affairs. They take a lot out of you. But so what you see here are some of the flat patterns that are traced at full scale onto the floor of Crosby 115, but also the kind of built bodies, which in some cases are individualized figures, but also some that take on affinities with other bodies, become linked as continuous surfaces, as very Deleuzian. And then part of the project was also kind of testing my own proportional system, which came out of flat pattern drafting and fashion. And so I would take a sloper that was essentially meant for a man, and then put a woman's measurements into it, or vice versa, and then watched it sort of collapse. You can see you can see the arm side here sort of popping out. So another project from Buffalo, which Joyce mentioned, which was also really formative for me, is Beyond Patronage. I was taken on after my first semester in Joyce's studio, where I was incidentally the only woman in a studio of a dozen. And she's like, we're thinking about doing this thing. Do you know any women architects that you want to invite for a conference? And then so it became like a really amazing 2-day affair where we invited practitioners of all kinds to see how they were operating as architects and what other strategies for enabling their practice they were taking on outside of the kind of conventional role of architect, client, or patron. And so the conference became a book, which has now had a couple of afterlives. You recognize these people, I'm sure. First at the storefront for art and architecture, and then elsewhere where we have been doing these kind of diagramming events, similar to the diagram that I opened with. So from one book to many more books. This is a gig I had at Columbia, an assistantship, where I was not just working on these texts in particular, in a variety of ways, editing, copy editing. I did some formatting for the periodical, the Avery Review. I ended up doing some archival research for the Manhattanville project. But I also ended up doing some design work. I was the only person in the book's office of, I think, 3 or 4 at the time that had an MArch or wanted to do anything with it. So they're like, hey, we want to make a reading room in the mezzanine level of Avery, which is what you see. You can see the stairs on one side. So we made this shelving system where we could display new titles. They have a kind of removable metal bookmark where you can take them off. It's not really an anti-theft device. They didn't really function like that. I'm not responsible for the scrolls on the other side, which are really amazing. But those are basically the printed digital publication, the Avery Review, scrolling slowly. It's a very disturbing noise, actually. And then just acoustically, we've done like a kind of felt wrap on one side to give a kind of sense of coziness and also dampen some of the sound. Some drawings that aren't displaying very well. And then another design project, which was an exhibition at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2016. We were releasing this book, Climates, Architecture and the Planetary Imaginary. And we were given an opportunity to show work on behalf of Columbia at large, well, the architecture school, and made use of the Sterling Books Pavilion to suspend all of the, not all of them, but many of the books that were cited in the kind of bibliography of climates. And so we couldn't do anything in the space because it's like very protected. They didn't even want us to hang a beam from which we could suspend these things. So there's a lot of negotiating with the Italian contractors and the Giardini. So we have just like a little polycarbonate tube that's strung through with some fluorescent cord. I'm gesturing on the screen in front of me, so that's not helpful. This is the tube, and this is the cord, and it's pretty straightforward. But this was just one of a few opportunities to travel on Columbia's dime. That's a benefit of going to a school like that. They have a lot of money to throw around, and you can ask for it when you want to research something, but it's also built into the curriculum when you have a studio or a seminar to go places. So some of those were with Studio X Amman. I went to Jordan and the Syrian border to look at a kind of complex border condition and conflict. I visited refugee camps in Jordan. As part of collecting architecture territories, I went to Moscow and Perm in Russia to do some research on the kind of real estates of contemporary art collection, including visiting this old constructivist theater, which had been recently bought by like a paper magnate who had this like very illustrious collection he wanted to show there. I don't have slides for those. I'm just telling you about travel to lead into this, which was the field research for my thesis at Columbia, which was about borderland detention. So specifically looking at a system of detention called CAR. CAR is an acronym for the Criminal Alien Requirement, which is a way of designating a kind of immigrant condition which leads them into incarceration, sometimes indefinite incarceration. And so these are prison sites that are wholly privately contracted in the Federal Bureau of Prison System. At the time of the research, there was like a dozen of them. 7 of them are located in border states, with 5 in Texas alone. So looking at the kind of layered jurisdictional landscape between federal prison and detention speculation, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol areas of responsibility and patrol sectors. Here's one of the sites that I visited. I'm going out of order, sorry about that. I wanted to get to this map where you can see these kinds of layers of policing territory. So I'll just go back. So it was a literal car trip, playing on the acronym, where I drove the length of the border, visiting prisons along the way. This one is in Willacy County in Texas, Raymondsville, Texas. This is a really interesting case that maybe you've heard about because there was a riot there when unanswered grievances by the detainees, all minimum security non-citizen inmates. They had health concerns that weren't being addressed. They were living in substandard conditions in a number of Kevlar tents that were erected when it opened first as a detention facility for ICE. On a very short schedule, something like 45 days that they made this prison to immediately address kind of overloading of the system at the time. This was in 2006 or 7, so Bush era detention. This property is not being used anymore because it was destroyed. The inmates burnt down the tents. So the kind of temporality of prison architecture was something I was really interested in this case, but also wanted to see across this entire landscape where not just migrant bodies were subject to conditions of procedural delay, either at the border, at off-border checkpoints, or in the kind of mechanisms of detention as housing, but like all the ways that you are made to slow kinds of conditions on the highway. And so I wanted to map that, and so this is an interactive map online. That's the title is the URL. You can look at it and scroll around. Yeah, maybe I'll just go through here. And then it brings in some data from TRAC at Syracuse, which looks at immigration data. They do a bunch of FOIA requests, so this is more readily available. So you get a sense of the population, where it's located within a jurisdiction, and what are the kind of ancillary sites that help to prop it up. And then also archiving the contracts that assign a kind of monetary value to the filled bed, in this case in New Mexico, but in the El Paso ICE field office. So you get a sense of the kind of overlaying jurisdictions here. So that is a brief look at my work at Columbia, but this kind of thesis project coincided with a number of others that were really exciting for me. This is where I met my collaborators, Virginia Black and Rosanna El-Khatib, who alongside me were doing like very amazing feminist projects, and we sort of came together at the end of the thesis semester and like looked deeply into each other's eyes and said, let's do this, like let's make it an office. I think, is that how it happens? Like you find your partners in school and you're like, let's make an architecture office. But it was a thing that like we hadn't yet seen in the world. We of course had wonderful mentors, Rosanna had Amanda Williams in Chicago. Virginia had Anya Sirota in Michigan. Joyce and Despina here at Buffalo. So we had sort of models, but not a way of working in the field that allowed us to kind of take on these projects. So F-architecture is in itself a kind of strange design project, which we're still figuring out. But the first move was to build a kind of fake space for it. So this is us on our digital temple front. There are a couple of modes if you look on our website, Redline, Classic. Monetize, all of these are either Patreon or affiliate links to Judith Butler books on Instagram, Amazon, sorry. So if you buy one, we get a cut. It was maybe a kind of rhetorical project. No one's ever bought anything. We've never gotten a kickback off of this. But it was just an idea of how we might earn a little chunk of change. And so this is us. This is us at our exhibition that just closed at the end of January in Prague. And this is the project I'm going to talk about today, which is really a series of projects that have lots of little projects associated. So where are we starting? So F-architecture got to spend its first year at New Inc., which is officially the GSAP incubator at New Inc., an initiative of the New Museum of Contemporary Art. But for us, we had 2 desks right next to the sauna building. It felt very official. We had an office. We had meetings on modular furniture and made these meeting minutes that had Princess Nokia GIFs in them. It was really great. And in our application to this space, you have to apply to David Benjamin. He's the one that reads them, I guess. And do a project that brings together architecture, urbanism, culture, technology in some way. But there are a lot of projects going on. They're all of the residents of the incubator have graduated from GSAP in the last 10 years, I think. And then we are one incubator island in the larger New Inc. incubator, which has a lot of arts, tech, startups and initiatives happening. So it's a really interesting community to be a part of. For us, it was and a real office, which seemed so absurd to have right after we started, full of shiny columns. And what we pitched to David Benjamin was a post-Fortist Hymen factory. So literally, we wanted to make artificial hymens, and I'll explain why. So in our deep conversations on the steps of Low Library at Columbia before graduation, we had started to get really obsessed about this thing we had found out about by way of Rosanna's thesis research, which is an artificial hymen. Usually it's a suppository, which is inserted to dissolve into a kind of membrane that can be penetrated and simulates blood. So it simulates an idea of virginity, and we're obsessed with it as a kind of design artifact, but also obsessed with it as a kind of commodity that circulated in a really strange way. So while we were at the incubator, we pursued it as research. First mapping its circulations, another map for me. So we looked at a number of manufacturers, largely coming from Asia. The artificial hymen was invented in the late 80s in Japan, but is now primarily manufactured in Chinese facilities. They're carried through European distributors and sold primarily to women in the Middle East and North Africa, and they're kind of diasporas. So we were tracing that, but also trying to gather up some kind of qualitative data about how people were using them, what they wanted or expected or desired of them. and what sorts of urgencies women were facing. This is something we confront a lot in our conversations about this project, where people don't necessarily think about virginity, but virginity is a status that continues to act on bodies in very particular ways in certain places. So for us, this research has been taken up in the Middle East, namely Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon. And then here is one of the proprietary devices. It just looks like a pill. It's a little demo video. I think you can watch it online. It's very strange. They like dip it into a fleshlight to test it. Very weird. So thinking about that object, we expanded our view into a number of devices and designed things that append or make the body seeable in a certain way, or bring it into a kind of ideal performance. So we looked at speculums, we looked at like high-tech menstrual devices, like the Thinx underwear. There's like a network tampon in there, but all the way back to like 19th century catamenial garments, which were like beautiful lingeries that women would wear to have their period in, curiously designed by men. A lot of these things are designed by men. And then into kind of anti-rape devices. So like all of these things that kind of support a version of a kind of sexually performing female body. And then our desire was to make critical hymen objects. So we wanted to think about the hymen that was in a way that was like not a part of the body, and it didn't have to simulate it with any veracity, but become a kind of present artifact within this existing market to sort of intervene in kind of conceptions about virginity. So this was a tattoo we made. This is also indicative of our circumstances at the time. We didn't have like money to manufacture in the way that we wanted to, so we did a lot of like sort of DIY projects. We made a little clinic pamphlet, which I think is also back here. And we also like talked about it incessantly. So we wrote some pieces, one in Real Review. We gave a lecture at this really amazing symposium put on by our friends' adjustments agency at the Neutra VDL House about gender, finance, and architecture, with a lot of really interesting projects. And then we gave a lecture at Studio X Amman about the research. And then we went to Beirut to look at another part of this virginity economy. So not just the device that you can buy online, but a procedure that you can also acquire in a certain way. But it's spaces of restoration, I guess. So looking really precisely at the clinics that are offering hymenoplastic procedures alongside a suite of other plastic surgery procedures. And we came to Beirut because it's this really interesting amalgam of medical tourism, but also like this kind of glamour of like Arab soap star beauty. There's like a really crass joke about Beirut being the place where you go to get a Western nose and an Arab vagina. So this is like exactly the kind of thing that we're looking at, which caters between like a kind of sense of urgency about the body and how it's supposed to be, but also a kind of desire for its more ideal form. And then looking at how that's reinforced in the architecture and the urban environment and a number of strange appearances, mainly by way of advertisements. So virginity is still a taboo. Its loss is an incredible taboo still faced by a lot of women in the Middle East, where we were looking. but these kinds of advertisements make it visible in a way that it can be discussed and also accessed. So this is an advertisement for this plastic surgery office, which has like this kind of beautiful villa up on the coast north of the city, and offers a suite of projects, including intimate surgeries, they're often called. And we found by going around to these different sites that even if this procedure was not advertised, you can go in, which is what we did. We went into clinics and asked about it, and they're more than willing to help you, which reveals a kind of like undercurrent of the virginity economy, which is less spoken. So we visited a lot of these. We're very taken by the interior decor of the clinic, and most notably by Dr. Nassar Hospital, which is this very strange building, also in the kind of outer reaches of Beirut, which is like just rife with references to the female form and the kind of celebrity figure of Dr. Nassar, who designs the most beautiful bodies. You can see in the corner there's an advertisement which is across his marketing materials of like a cello and then like a lady's side. And the interior is amazing. So you go in, there's this like full mannequin that's a lamp. It has like this big brimmed hat, lights shine down, and you're meant to sit next to it and wait until you're called down into this waiting room. So there's a circular staircase, and a lot of couches. You have Lebanese fashion television playing in the background, and just like all manner of female figures incorporated into the decor. And this extends even to the recovery suites, which are themed. This is, I think, the classic suite. And there's a promotional video in which Dr. Nassar appears debuting his themed suites. You can see it's full of models. There's a video that's part of the exhibition that we run. So all of this research led to us taking on the architectural object, the interior artifacts of the hymenoplasty clinic, thinking about ways in which the kind of designed object of the hymen and the clinic. Am I like really over? Okay, I'm gonna blow through this then. So this is the result of all of that. And we were really fortunate to win an open call for this exhibition at Vipera Gallery, which they gave us sort of carte blanche to do what we wanted based on the research that we had submitted. It opened in November and just closed a couple weeks ago. And so essentially we rebuilt the kind of most exciting components of the clinic, but as a way to engage also with a suite of critical hymen objects, which depart from the kind of object of the pill or even the tattoo, a hymen applied, but started to think about more architectural objects, things that are worn in certain ways and things that have different spatialities that act on the kind of concept of virginity. So this is a self-examination chair, which is a lot to get into. But essentially riffing on the kind of experience of being seen within the examination room, having a gaze turned back onto your own body, and so there's also a VR component to this exhibition. We also collaborated with a UB alum, Kathy Ewan, who works in VR. So she helped us put together a number of experiences. This is the kind of component to this experience where you are in the stirrups and you're listening to women who have gone through this procedure or encountered it in a certain way. So this is a kind of like ethnographic component of the the exhibition. There was a perfume that we made that was displayed in the lobby of the clinic. Perfume that we had mixed in Amman in the women's bazaar. We asked the guy, what does a bride wear on her first night as a married woman? And he immediately pulled out white oud, and we also got this one called Good Girl, which did not smell good. And then this is the other space in the gallery, which riffs on the recovery suite in Nassar Clinic. And you can see another still from that video projected. There's Rosanna on a rug, another kind of Hymen object made on bubble wrap. You step on it, it's laid out to be ruined. Yeah, too much to get into, but I'll stop there.
One is Caitlin Donovan. She works at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She took a position there in 2016 as a community planning and development representative. She is currently a participant in the department's management development program and has been certified as a program environmental specialist in the Buffalo field office. Second presenter is Rebecca Yanis. She's the director of the planning and development for the city of Dunkirk. She works with the municipal leaders, planners, and developers to create a better tomorrow for Dunkirk. She also works on multiple private projects to help developers secure grant funding and incentives for new development in the city of Dunkirk. The third presenter is Daniel Crowther. He's a project manager for TM Montante development. He manages all pre-construction activities for TM Montante development projects. His background in urban design, architecture, historic preservation, and real estate development, as well as his fluency in architectural and financial modeling, has enabled TM Montante development to expand its development portfolio and further its pursuit of smart growth and architectural significant design. Let's join me to welcome these speakers.
Okay, let's see. Put this in my pocket. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Donovan and I work for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Before that, I was at a nonprofit called Heart of the City Neighborhoods, so I'm going to be able to give you a perspective on both of those. A little bit about myself. I went to UB for undergrad and got my bachelor's in environmental design. I started out wanting to do architecture, and I think I lasted in studio about a day. But I was also here for track. I had a scholarship, so I had to decide what I was going to do. I looked at other schools before UB, and they all said it was impossible, but UB let me try to do both. And I found out why it was impossible. So I chose to continue with track, and I switched to environmental design, and it was actually what I was looking for all along. So then I went on to get my master's in urban planning. And after that, it took me about 6 months to find a job. I moved back to Rochester, where I'm from, for a little bit, and then I found the job at the nonprofit Heart of the City. It was part-time, so I was driving back and forth 3 days a week, and then I had to get a job at a gym. That was very humbling. So after about a month, the person ahead of me was laid off, and I was offered that position, and I took it, and so I started at Heart of the City as the program director, and I was there for 5 years. So Heart of the City is a nonprofit in the Lower West Side creating affordable housing. They do this through numerous programs: owner-occupied rehab, weatherization, emergency home repair, multifamily development, acquisition, rehab, resale, which we call CHODO, down payment closing cost assistance. These programs are funded by the state or the city, and owner-occupied rehab was our core program. When I was there, we did about 50 homes in the Lower West Side. It's very popular, and it's one of the ways to combat gentrification, creating affordable homes for people that are already living there and allowing them to continue to stay there by helping them rehab. Acquisition, rehab, resale. You take a property that's dilapidated, rehab it, and resell it to a first-time home buyer. All of our programs you have to be income qualified for. And the multifamily housing development, we did a couple. I did one myself before I left, and I'll get into that a little later. I have some pictures. The weatherization, emergency home repair, and down payment closing cost assistance. Those were all city funded, and we did that towards the end of my 5 years there. We got those grants, and we kind of expanded our territory to do the whole west side and offer those programs. So nonprofits, you are going to be doing everything from start to finish, writing the grant that will pay for your salary and pay for the project, working with the clients, taking their application, income qualifying them, working with contractors, hiring the contractors, paying the contractors, working with community partners to get more money for the project if you need it, working with the funders, reporting to them. So it's from start to finish, you're doing everything. So I learned a lot quickly. And I didn't really know a lot about affordable housing going into it. I was given $700,000 to oversee right away, and I had to figure it out. And I was really lucky because my mentor and my executive director, Stephanie Simeon, she was an MUP as well at UB. And I'm thankful for her because she really empowered me to be a leader and figure things out on my own. She told me if I had an issue to figure out some solutions first to bring to her, not just come and ask questions constantly. So that really it empowered me to figure things out and get projects done on my own. Okay, so here's some pictures. This project, we probably put about $50,000 into it. It's an all or nothing program, so unfortunately we did have to deny people, but that's how the funding works. It's pretty strict. We did siding, roof, windows, furnace. That's a lot of the core items that we did for people. Here's another project that got painting. Again, you can see the roof got done. I can't remember everything that was done for each project, but those are the main things on this one. This project, we did partner with the Erie County Health Department to remediate the lead. So this was a major project. They took care of the lead portion of it, and we did the rest. I believe there was a structural issue we had to take care of, siding, we did roof, probably a furnace, windows. So this is an example of a community partnership that brought different funds together to get a project done. Here's another home that got painted. This one's across the street from the first one I showed. And on that block, we actually did several properties, and that's always great because then there's a larger impact in the neighborhood. So then on to acquisition, rehab, resale for first-time home buyers. So we call these chodos. But this property was already done by the time I started, and I had to sell it. And at that time, it was 2012, and this was before the city exploded and property values were just skyrocketing. So this is on Whitney Place, and it was a quiet street and kind of difficult to sell. It took a while, but we had a construction line where we had to sell these properties to be able to do the next one. So I had to kind of put on a real estate hat and get this property and this property sold. This one is 2 doors down. So there was also, during that time, issues with security. We'd have break-ins that I'd have to deal with. This property here has a small studio in the back, so this was a tune unit. And actually, we did have to sell that one to someone that wasn't income qualified just so we could get it sold and get on to the next properties. This one here, it's part of a total of 4 properties that we got from Housing Court, and we got them for $1. Unfortunately, we had to demolish 2 because of structural issues and cost. You'll see that here. So the red one to the right, we did have to sell to a local developer to be able to afford to do just one of them. It was about $350,000, so that's the only one we could afford to do. So we sold that other one off, and that one did get rehabbed as well. But back to this. This property was disgusting. I went inside and there was junk. People had been living there. It was known for drug activity. There was needles on the floor. This one I had to constantly check on because people would dump garbage behind it. And I have a picture of this, someone dumped a boat behind the house. And I had to find a way to dispose of the boat. So this one was a labor of love. It was my first choto where I was there from start to finish. And there is the boat. Okay. So here's some interior shots. This is after the cleanup on the left. And then on the right, it's during construction. Obviously, there's no flooring yet. And then this, there must have been a fire at some point. But then this is the second to last choto that we had. And I think they got this either donated or it was purchased for about $10,000, which is really impossible to do these days. So that's why this program, they're not doing at this moment because it's really difficult to make the numbers work. But we kept the historical details as much as we could. It was really interesting. This had a back staircase that went to what would have been like a maid's quarter, and they had old gas lamps and everything. So this property is really cool. We almost made it our office at one point. So here you can see we kept the wood floors and the detail. The contractor did a really great job. And then this is the last choto that we had. So I think this was the oldest one, about 1890 it was built. There was a structure in the back that had to be demoed. This one had a massive fire. So yeah, this shows the progress, cleaning all that out. And again, the longer you have these just sitting there, the more issues you run into with security. People would rip the board off and go inside and be living in there. So we had to get these done as quickly as we could, but construction can take a while. Okay, so this project I didn't do, but I wanted to mention it because it was one of the first of its kind in our neighborhood, first one that we did, of its scale, that is. So this is an 8-unit building. It's on Hudson Street. It was very controversial. It took about 6 years to actually get it in place. The neighborhood just didn't know what to expect, and you're right next to the Allentown Historic District, so they were worried about property values, and they didn't really know our organization as well at that time. But in the end, they've seen that it's a success, and if you drive past it, you might miss it because the architect that we used really took in colors of the neighborhood and style and design, and it really does blend in nicely. Before, it was just a vacant lot. Here's a shot inside. So this one is my multifamily development that I did right before I started at HUD, and so it's my baby. There was a church, Mount Aaron Baptist, that wanted to do a project for apartments, and they can't apply for city funds on their own, so they needed a developer, and we had the experience. So I did everything from start to finish. I wrote the grant, I hired the architect, hired the contractor, and saw it all the way through to rent up in the grand opening. So this was a completely vacant lot. This was my most challenging and the project I grew from the most because I was constantly putting out fires and working with the church. They weren't familiar with how the grant funds work. And so I had to teach that in a way and get them to understand that there's certain requirements that the funding allows, and you have to follow them or you're out of compliance. So here's some pictures of that. So this is for seniors. Again, the architects took into consideration the colors of the church in the design. That's another thing. Some of the choices were not in our control because this project wasn't owned by us. We were just a developer. So here's some more interior shots. But in the end, I'm really proud of it and would consider it a success for the neighborhood. So then HUD. So I actually interviewed for HUD twice. The first time was 2 years prior. I started in HUD in 2016, so 2014. I interviewed, and at that time, I wasn't exactly ready to take on a position like HUD is. HUD is more paperwork, I'd say. So I did go for the interview, and during the interview, I kind of agreed with the director that I wasn't ready for that kind of role. I was still really invested in the work in the community, and I really wanted to stay there. So I'm glad for that, because 2 years later, after I did Mount Aaron, I showed to them the difference I have made and my confidence, and so I think that really helped me when I went for the interview, and so I got the job. HUD's mission is very similar to Heart of the Cities, creating strong communities and housing. I work in the Buffalo field office, which is downtown. HUD is located in the HUD headquarters is located in Washington, D.C., but there's field offices throughout the nation. So the Buffalo field office oversees everything all the way up to about New York City, and I oversee right now Binghamton, Watertown, Jefferson County. But these are the the divisions that are currently in our office. Community planning development is what I work in. We have public and Indian housing, fair housing, and single and multifamily. Multifamily, unfortunately, went through a transformation, so that division is been dispersed to other locations, so there's not very many people in that division in our office anymore. So our office probably has about 50 or so at this time. They don't hire very often, but at one point, I think the Buffalo field office had over 200 people. So unfortunately, the staff size has gone down, but the work doesn't change. This is just more about community planning and development itself. I really want to talk about the funding that we have. So I oversee different types of funds: CDBG, Home, ESG, HOPWA, and COC. So we have basically two main programs, what we would call entitlement and homeless. So ESG and COC is what homeless grants go towards, and CDBG and Home are, and actually, sorry, ESG is part of this entitlement pot, but it's for homeless persons. So for the entitlement pot, those are grants that are formula-based, so cities receive funds and they use them for public services, affordable housing, economic development, things like that. And then there's other funds that are applied for on a competitive basis, and they're annual grants for homeless to do things like provide rental assistance for homeless persons. So homeless was something that I did have to learn, and same with CDBG. I didn't really work with that money a lot, so there was a learning curve and still is. Here's just a map, and I actually used my skills from undergrad to create this for our office. I used Illustrator. And so this is the area that we cover, and there's 30 grantees in the entitlement, which is that formula grant. And so you can see we go across the state, a lot of territory to cover. And then this is the COCs that we have. Hold on. This is the entitlement, sorry. This is overall. This is entitlement. So about 30 grantees there. And then this is COC. So you can see they're divided up into counties. So the counties, they have to all work together and put in one application. There's multiple grants within that, but the nonprofits have to work together to submit together under one, what we call continuum of care. So you can see the one in Buffalo covers Erie, Niagara, Orleans, Genesee, and Wyoming. So it's a big area that they have to cover. Okay, and this is second to last slide. Processing and reviewing is something that we do constantly at HUD. It's, like I said, more paperwork. We're reviewing plans that cities submit, their annual reports that they submit. We're changing budgets. We're getting calls from grantees. So I still get a little piece of working in the community by talking to my grantees and learning what projects they're doing. So I still get that little piece of that, which is nice. And then compliance monitoring, which is kind of like auditing. So we go out into the field and we review paperwork and make sure they're complying with the regulations. So that is all about me and what I do. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Yanis. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Dunkirk. I want to thank you so much for having me today. It's really an honor to be up here with all of these great colleagues that went to UB and that are doing really, really cool stuff. So thanks again for having me. A little bit about what my presentation is going to involve. I want to give a background on who I am and how I got here. And then I want to talk more details about my current position for the city of Dunkirk, and to understand that better you need to understand the city. And then I want to go into details about what I do. So a big component of that involves plans and studies that we are currently working on. It also involves grant writing and the importance of implementing the projects that are involved and within our plans and studies. It also includes public improvement projects that are really important to the city of Dunkirk and are important to placemaking as an avenue for creating an attractive environment for the city and for its residents. And then the importance of private investments and how it all relates and all goes together in a cohesive way for job creation, retention, and growth to create this community that people want to play, work, and live in. So a little background about myself. I grew up right around the Jamestown, New York area, Celeron, New York to be specific, right on Chautauqua Lake. I'm really, really attracted to waterfront development and waterfront planning. So, you know, working for the city of the Dunkirk as a planning and development director is really a dream come true. I started as an undergrad at Kent State University. I went to school there for pre-dental. I thought the dentist path would be my path. Soon I found out that that was nothing what I wanted to do, and I was still trying to discover what exactly that was. I switched majors and transferred to UB for engineering and spent a year in the engineering program. I thought I was really interested in that, but I still didn't fit. And I talked to my engineering advisor and said, you know, I really want to be a part of community development. I want to create places, be a part of waterfront development and the ecology and environment. And she said, what about urban planning? And I said, what is urban planning? I've never heard of it. So she gave me the spiel and really pointed me in the direction of environmental design, and that took me to the next step and said, I've got to stay on for my MUP. This is exactly what I want to be doing. So that led to the MUP program and graduating UB with that. And right out of college, I was looking probably my final spring semester in the MUP program for a job in the Buffalo area. And unfortunately, I couldn't really find an entry-level position right in Buffalo. So I looked all across New York State, and Albany was one of the closest areas that I could find. And I had a position as a junior planner for LaBerge Group, a private engineering and planning firm in Albany. And what that entailed in the private side of things it entailed basically getting my hands involved in a little bit of everything that you learn in urban planning and environmental design. I was making maps using my GIS skills. I was a part of the planning process in over 15 different communities throughout New York State, comprehensive plans, local waterfront revitalization plans, rezoning plans. I was a part of creating change for those different communities all across the state. Another big role and piece that I learned as a private, in part of being on the private side, was grant writing. And grant writing is so important in an urban planning profession, because you do all this work to get these great plans and these great projects, and you get involvement from the community and hear what they want to have accomplished and find out these projects. But then you get to the point, who's going to fund them? How are you going to bring together the money to create these changes and implement the projects? So a big part is grant writing, and that's a huge piece in the urban planning field. That I always stress when I meet someone that's in these programs is if there's a grant writing class, to please take it. It's so important. So grant writing, and then another piece that I also worked on in the private sector was administering these grants. So once we got the grant funding, communities would say, hey, we don't really understand the specifics that maybe a HUD grant might have, like Caitlin was describing, but they're very detail oriented, and administering those programs and those projects were a part of my role as well. So I was in Albany for just a little over a year and a half. Really enjoyed it there, enjoyed my time there. I worked with 15 different municipalities across New York State, but I always wanted to get back to this area. My friends, family, everyone was in Chautauqua and Erie County. So once I heard that the development director position was open at the city of Dunkirk, I jumped on the opportunity to apply. So a little bit about the city of Dunkirk. The city of Dunkirk is a small city, and it's only about 50 miles southwest of the city of Buffalo. It's roughly 12,000, a little over 12,000 population size. It's got a really diverse, interesting population. Roughly 30% of the population is Hispanic, which is interesting, and that is, out of New York City, the largest Hispanic population in New York State. So it's a really interesting area with this really great Hispanic culture. Then you also have your big Polish population, your Swedish and Italian, but really in the past 10 to 20 years, the Hispanic population has really boomed. And a lot of this had to do with the immigration of people coming to the city of Dunkirk to work in a lot of the grape fields that surround the city and in Chautauqua County. So early on, there was a big migration of the Hispanic population, and now there's just the families that are coming now, especially with the past hurricanes. We've seen some increases with population growth from that. So like I said, it's a very diverse and really interesting population. The city of Dunkirk's mayor is the first Hispanic mayor in New York State. So it's a really exciting time for the city of Dunkirk in the fact of that diversity and celebrating that. A little bit more about Dunkirk is that it also is an entitlement community, very, very specific to what Caitlin was talking about. We receive HUD funds to implement CDBG projects, community development block grant funds that we receive, and I help to administer those grant funds to different nonprofits and different organizations like Boys and Girls Club and like Striders to help the educational side of things in communities. We also do a lot of sidewalk improvements. We use the funds for street improvements, park improvements, and we're all actually going to be starting what's called HOPE, Hispanic Opportunities for Progress in Education, which will be a new little facility that we're going to be utilizing some HUD funds to help that Hispanic community. One of the great things that I love about the city of Dunkirk is its waterfront, and you can see in the picture here, Dunkirk has like a really, really beautiful waterfront. It has a inner harbor that's a safe inner harbor that acts as a cove almost for any boats that are traversing Lake Erie. The inner harbor is really something that the whole community loves and is really involved in. Dunkirk has 4 beautiful beaches and some great parks. Wright Park and Point Gratiot Park are right on the waterfront, and we have a trail that nearly connects the whole entire waterfront besides that beautiful power plant right here, NRG. So that's our some people might call it ugly, but I think it really gives it that defining characteristic of the city of Dunkirk, and it's an interesting issue that Dunkirk's currently facing with the NRG plant. Currently, NRG is not repowering. They were going to repower as natural gas plants, but that's no longer happening, so it's sitting there vacant and mothballed. And that's one of the city's greatest tax contributors. So that's a major impact on the city of Dunkirk, and currently something that we're working on. and specifically not just to the city of Dunkirk, but Chautauqua County and the school tax base as well. So that's a major issue and something that we're currently starting to look at as a possibility for adaptive reuse of the space. So when I talk about my position at the City of Dunkirk and what I do, I always like to start with our planning efforts. These are 3 of the plans that we're currently working on, as well as the 4th one, which is the biggest one, the city's comprehensive plan. The City of Dunkirk hasn't had an updated comprehensive plan since 1976. And when you think about that's amazing, because communities rely on their comprehensive plans to help guide the future development of cities and communities. So there was a huge need when I came into the office. I said, it's time. The city needs to get this updated. So that is the biggest piece that we've been currently facing. We're about 75% through. We have some major community workshops coming up at the end of February, at the end of this month, and our goal is to be closing up the comprehensive plan to have the final draft done this summer. So active listening is something that we're constantly doing with our community, and we're really excited to get input from our Hispanic community, especially for that comprehensive plan. 3 other plans that we're involved in, 2 we've completed so far. We completed our phase 2 BOA plan, and what a BOA is, it's the Brownfield Opportunity Area, and that plan specifically looks at brownfield sites in the city and focuses on which ones we want to look at redeveloping. So out of our BOA plan, we decided on 15 specific sites within the city that are looking at the different environmental hazards on the site, what they're involved in, what kind of characteristics are on the sites, who owns the properties, what we need to do to move forward with some phase 1 and phase 2 environmental studies on these sites, so that these sites can be either redeveloped or creatively adapted for revitalization of Dunkirk. And what we found a lot from this study is that many of these BOA sites are within our waterfront district, and this plan kind of helped start to build a mini economic development waterfront plan for our waterfront. So out of this, we've been able to market some of these sites to developers. One city-owned brownfield site is actually in negotiations for a new hotel/brewery development happening on it. So we're starting to see some turnaround on these brownfield sites. And one big thing out of this plan is that we are officially a BOA designated community. And what that means is that developers that come in and develop on these brownfield sites get cleanup credits. Well, since we're a BOA designated community, that means they get 5 extra credits, which is huge in creating that turnaround for developing those sites. It makes it very attractive for the developer to clean up and develop on that site, because most likely the cost of cleanup and the incentive that they receive back is going to be much more substantial than the actual cost of cleanup. Another plan that we finished up is Choosing Dunkirk, and it's a strength-based strategy for problem properties in Dunkirk, New York. Dunkirk, like many of the communities all across New York State, has a really old housing stock, and we wanted to get a better understanding of our neighborhoods and what kind of shape they're in. So we got a bunch of community people to donate their time to go out and to survey every house in the city of Dunkirk. So we did a windshield survey. A lot of people walked, and some people drove their cars through the different streets, but they had a different grading scale for the best kind of houses to the worst, and we worked with consultants to help develop this grading scale, and every house was graded on this scale. And at the end of it, we were able to see a map. We mapped this information, and we were able to now have a clear understanding of, from the green neighborhoods to the red neighborhoods, where our neighborhoods, where we should be focusing our efforts and different grant funding for these neighborhoods. So one of the big things that we found out is that green was the best, red was the worst, orange was that middle ground. Well, we decided that we're going to be focusing our efforts on that orange zone, because that orange zone could turn red, but it also could turn green. So the idea is to funnel some grant funding and investment into the orange zone neighborhoods so that we can boost that neighborhood into that green zone. And then that also, it's not that we're forgetting our red zone, but the hopes is that you get more community engagement and more ownership out of that orange zone, and then the red zone sees, hey, maybe I can start to make little improvements and adjustments, and we try to shift that neighborhood scale of improving our housing stock. So that's kind of where we're at with choosing Dunkirk. And then the last plan that we're involved in is we're involved in the Northern Chautauqua County Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. And we're one of 10 communities in this program. And I like to specifically kind of talk about LWRPs as more defined comprehensive plans for your waterfront. So it is kind of like a mini economic development plan for how you want to see your waterfront developed and moving forward in the future. And this plan, we're currently in the middle of that process as well. So based on these plans and these projects, or plans and studies that we've been doing, we've been seeing a lot of projects coming out of them. And I want to stress the importance of grant writing again. Planning cannot stop at plans and studies. The whole purpose of being an urban planner is to implement projects, and the role in my job is, once these plans and studies are done, that they don't go sitting on a shelf. And so grant writing is a huge importance in my work at the City of Dunkirk. It's such an important tool to have. Over the past 2.5 years, the city has submitted over 20 grants, and we're currently administering 17 grants that total to approximately $6.2 million. There are numerous different public improvement projects that we're working on, and they range from New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation to New York State Department of Transportation, New York State Empire State Development grants, New York State DEC grants, New York State Department of State grants. We have a federal grant through the EPA, and we have a New York State Agriculture and Markets grant that we just received to do a new animal shelter and dog park in the city. So out of these grants, one of the biggest ones that we've recently received is the Central Connections Project grant. And what that includes is, back in 2016, back in 2016, the City of Dunkirk and the Village of Fredonia were awarded a technical assistance grant from the UBRI Regional Institute to be able to come up with a way to better connect the Village of Fredonia, SUNY Fredonia, and the City of Dunkirk. And out of that was the Central Connection Project. And it basically looked at Central Avenue and the fact that it does connect the heart of the Village of Fredonia. Along that same route is SUNY Fredonia, and at the end of it is Dunkirk's Pier. So what kind of projects could be made out of this? Well, this study said that specifically you need more walkability, you need to create better modes of transportation. So it focused on creating a more walkable environment along Central Avenue, and also created a celebration of both communities. So Dunkirk Pier's largest asset is the waterfront and its pier. So how do you get SUNY Fredonia students to transverse back to the pier, but at the same time go back and forth to the Village of Fredonia and really celebrate our assets? So out of this, 3 projects came about. The one project was a public improvement project for Dunkirk's Pier. The second one was the Central Connections Bicycle and Pedestrian Improvement Project. And then the third one was kind of a rebranding and marketing of Dunkirk and its downtown area. So in this picture, we started the planning process by looking at the pier, and from this process, we held a lot of community forums, and we wanted to get the community involved in what they loved about the pier and what was so important to them about the pier, and looked at a lot of different precedents as well about a lot of different piers that are all across the United States. And at first we said, let's create a pedestrian-only pier. Well, that didn't fly with the residents. Dunkirk's pier, it has always acted as a place where people can drive their cars onto and can drive around. And this is such a huge cultural piece in the city of Dunkirk. I know a lot of people, think, let's make this pedestrian only, but unfortunately we got a lot of negative feedback for that. So we went back and forth. We said, how can we make this a compromisable plan that, the residents enjoy, but we can also create as a tourism destination for the city of Dunkirk. So out of that, let me see if I can get it, is this design, which will be implemented this April for the starting of the construction. It's a little shaky. Sorry about that. There's not. But again, there was no defining characteristic, no archway that says this is Dunkirk's pier. We wanted to create some shaded structures. There is the opportunity to still park on the pier, but we've taken away about half of that parking. You can still drive around the pier, but the city has the option of putting bollards up that can take away traffic and that can allow traffic to be there. And then also create green space, more pedestrian-friendly places for people to hang out and enjoy the waterfront, and include additional seating for people along the pier, more fishing opportunities and fishing areas. That's a lot of what we heard. And at the same time, making this more of a pedestrian environment that is traffic calming and allows for better traffic and pedestrian access. So currently, right now, as you can see, there's sidewalks that run along this way. Dunkirk has trails that run to the east and west of the pier, and right now they're disconnected, so making that better connection for pedestrian movement was huge. And just making it more visually appealing and aesthetically pleasing. In addition, there's some private investment that's also going to be in the pier. This little building here is going to be a cabana bar kind of type feel. It will allow for some refreshments and a drink area. It has the really cool garage doors, kind of a nautical feel so that you can sit, relax, enjoy the views of the waterfront and the marina. So in addition to the pier improvement project, we have the bicycle and pedestrian improvements as well, and that will include bike lanes, new signage, new banners to unify the communities together. Right now, Dunkirk doesn't have many bike lanes, so this is very new to Dunkirk and exciting, but just implementing those new complete street pieces is really going to revitalize and hopefully bring people downtown. And then lastly, the branding and marketing campaign for Dunkirk, creating this almost cool vibe for Dunkirk, New York. The little city on the lake is kind of how we're branding it. It's that little city between Buffalo, between Erie, between Jamestown, but it's on the waterfront to entice people, to let people know that we are on Lake Erie and that we celebrate that. So why the importance of public improvements and public investment is so that we can attract more people and more private investments. So currently I work on a lot of projects with private developers. One big one that maybe people in here are in the know about is Phoenix. It's a manufacturing a pharmaceutical manufacturing company that's going to be bringing over 400 jobs to the city of Dunkirk. And those 400 jobs are set to double within the first couple years of Phoenix opening. So we're talking 800 jobs to the community within the next 2 years. And that's what's constantly going on in my mind. How do we create a city that people want to live, work, and play in? So that's the importance of making these changes to the pier, helping improve the parks, helping improve the streets and the walkability, and bringing in new little local businesses to help grow that. In addition to Phoenix, we have Fieldbrook Foods, which is an ice cream manufacturing company in the city. They are they're in development of a large cold storage warehouse in the city. It's on a brownfield site that we're really happy about. We're working with the developers Crowther Development to develop that site. We also have a big transportation company coming to the city, Agricultural Transport, that's recently bought some property that will be housing their offices here. So a lot of good things as far as private investments. We also have some new housing developments that are happening, affordable housing project with a 24 scattered site project happening in the city of Dunkirk. Right across from Phoenix are the villas at Battery Point, and that's going to be upper end housing apartments. That's kind of their phase one. They're also going to do condos and private homes. It's a long stretch of land right along Dunkirk's waterfront. There's also been a new school, the P-Tech Academy, that really focuses on technology-based education for young students ages 8th grade to seniors at a old school in Dunkirk that they adaptively reused for the city. And then Holiday Harbor, we have a new marina operator who's really making some big investments at the city of Dunkirk as well. And that's it.
So we'll hold off on the questions.
Hello? Is it working? Yep. Good.
Back and then the fingers at the top.
Okay. Well, we gotta go back. Oh, hang on. Go back to the first slide. Okay, here we go. No, it's all right. All right, so hi everyone. My name's Dan Crowther. Thanks everybody for fighting through an ice storm to get here and for sticking around. I will be talking today about my path to real estate development. How I got here and what I do. So I'm a development project manager, and today I'm going to talk about where do I work now, what do we do, what do I do specifically, and how did I get here. And I'm going to move around a lot because that's what I do. So I work for, I'm going to give a company overview of the Montante Group. So I work for the Montante Group, which is a commercial real estate owner and developer. Here in Buffalo, New York. We're based in Tonawanda. And we have, it's 3 operating companies that work together, work on projects simultaneously together towards a common good. So we have a construction company, a development company, and a solar company. I work for the development company, and we're a design-oriented company that develops what we consider to be smart and distinctive properties in the Buffalo-Niagara region. We manage active development projects. We have a full-service property management and design services department. And we also lease vacant space in our current holdings. There's a couple images of some projects that we're working on in Niagara Falls in the city of Buffalo, and a 200-acre commercial office park that we own and develop in the city of Tonawanda. Montante Construction is a full-service general contractor and construction management company that builds all of our development projects and also builds third-party projects. The image on our left there is it's a project at Gates Circle, adjacent to Gates Circle, called People Inc., which is a multifamily affordable housing project that we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from being complete on right now. And we offer development services in that, so a good example of how development and construction work together in that case. And they also offer, Montante Construction also offers construction support for all of our development and solar projects. So they install and operate all of our solar energy systems as well. So Montante Solar, Become a Solar Hero is our tagline. And we install and operate commercial scale solar projects on commercial properties all over the region, as far east as the Capital District, as far south as Jamestown, in the Rochester area, Buffalo area. We sell the solar systems, we install the solar systems, so you can generate power out of a system that we are leasing to you, or you can own your own solar energy system. On our left over there, we're looking at, that's a Buffalo Public School, I'm not sure which one, but we installed energy systems on the roof of all the Buffalo Public Schools. And so they're generating power that powers their building and also goes back into the grid if it exceeds what they use on a daily basis, which is pretty cool. So what do we do as developers? So we practice in the Buffalo and Niagara region. We have 4 strategic development hubs: Niagara Falls, the city of Tonawanda, Gate Circle, and the city of Buffalo. Lancaster Square at Gate Circle is one of our more high-profile projects. Some of you may drive past it on a daily basis. It's right adjacent to Gate Circle. Canterbury Woods has been operational for about a year. It's a senior housing complex that we sold the land. We did not build it, but they are our neighbor. And then in Niagara Falls, we have a pretty high-profile project on Niagara Street. Is this working? Hold it back here. Good? Good? Okay. Tell me if it gets too loud. So what we acquired the former Millard Fillmore Gate Circle Hospital in 2014 through a competitive RFP process from Kaleida Health. And what we did was we worked with the community and with the Urban Land Institute on putting together a project, a program, a mixed-use program. And the recommendation and our subsequent proposal was to demolish the hospital, almost 1 million square feet of hospital, and build several mixed-use projects on the site where the hospital formerly was. So a portion of this was original buildings. This was part of the original hospital. The parking garage supported the hospital. This was an ancillary project, and these 3 buildings are all brand new, including Canterbury Woods. 4 buildings are brand new on the site of what the former hospital was. So we worked very closely with the community throughout the process. Bradshaw's laughing because he's was a part of it.
Not brand new. They don't exist yet.
Well, they don't exist yet. They will be brand new. They will be brand new. They're brand new proposals. But we worked very closely with the community on this project. And Bradshaw and Deet Shibley were a part of that. The UBRI has been a part of that process from the beginning. And when we started this project, the community was ready to burn us at the stake. They thought we were bringing in Walmart, and we were going to build parking lots and strip malls, and that was never our intent. We worked through, about 18 months or so working with the community to ensure them that what wasn't what we were building. And now we have a great relationship with them, and all of these images that you're seeing have all been shopped by the Community Advisory Committee, which is a committee that comprises local stakeholders in the community, block groups, UB, the Buffalo Planning Board. And what we've put together are conceptual projects that we believe are well-designed mixed-use buildings that are going to create vibrancy and complement the architectural heritage of the Delaware District. One of the buildings, which we'll mention, 1299 Delaware, which is immediately south of the Canterbury Woods building, is a building that it has full site plan approval, full community support, 100% construction documents, and we're working to put together the financing. Because as a developer, you'll learn that although you may have a permit and construction drawings and support, you have to pay for it somehow. The planing mill is another one of our more high-profile projects in the city of Buffalo. It's on Elm Street. It's a historic adaptive reuse of the former E.M. Hager & Sons planing mill, and now it's 22 market rate loft apartments and a Class A office space on the ground floor. It's the home of C&S, which is an civil engineering firm in Buffalo. And the planing mill's been transformational. We relied on a lot of public money with this project. BUDC, Buffalo Urban Development Corporation, provided a pretty substantial grant to make this project possible. We also relied on historic tax credits and put together a pretty large financial stack to make this one happen. And this is, again, one of our more high-profile projects that we're pretty proud of. And Riverview Solar Technology Park is a 200-acre business park in Tonawanda that's powered by solar. So every project in this park has a solar component, has a solar energy system that's providing some power or all of their, well, not all of their power, but some power. None are off the grid. But we have mixed-use commercial office warehouse distribution buildings on site. The proximity to Canada and to the border and to international airports make this site perfect for distribution. And we have FedEx Trade Networks as one of our larger tenants. They have a distribution facility there at the park. Buildings range from 26,000 to over 100,000 square feet. And we've spent a lot of time as a design services department. So within the development company, we have a design services department. So I have associates that work with me and our design coordinator, and we spend a lot of time master planning and conceptualizing site plans, master plans, floor plans, project concepts, and the image that you're looking at on the left is how we've more or less carved out these parcels that our sales and leasing department can then take and shop out to potential tenants. So what do I specifically do? I'm going to walk through a couple projects that I've managed, and so 616 Niagara is in Niagara Falls. That was a project that we acquired through a competitive RFP process from the city of Niagara Falls. It was a 25,000 square foot building. There were three buildings, 1, 2, 3. And the project, what we put together is we have one contiguous commercial office space in the center that's connected with an atrium, which you see here in the middle. And the Niagara Global Tourism Institute, which is an agency in Niagara Falls that promotes tourism and tourism training in the city. Their executive director is Pat Whalen, who's the former executive director of the BNMC. So we partnered with Pat Whalen on the RFP response, and he's now our commercial tenant, and we've gotten to know Pat really well. We have a great relationship with him now. He'll be occupying the ground floor, almost 10,000 square feet, and we're introducing 17 market rate apartments above. And in the city of Niagara Falls, we worked really closely with the city, with the economic development folks in the city of Niagara Falls, and they were very upfront with us in telling us that there are very few to no market rate apartment options in the city of Niagara Falls for employees of the city, for employees of the casino, and for employees of just in Niagara Falls in general. And so that was something that was a market gap that we're taking advantage of. So my responsibilities on this project were putting together and writing the initial RFP response, performing financial analysis. So what we do here is we can project what our rents will be, what our income will be. We can also project where our construction and development costs will be, and we put together a pro forma to determine whether or not the project will have some rate of return that's positive, right? We have to make money on the project, not just so we can put money in our own pockets, but in order to get money from the bank, it has to be, we have to have a profitable project. They require debt service coverage ratios that are, above a certain number. We worked on all of our public approvals, so we had to get a site plan approval from the city. We also had to get sign off from the Historic Preservation Commission because this is a historic tax credit project. I worked with on due diligence with a historic preservation consultant as well as environmental engineers and consultants. The site's not dirty; it's not a brownfield site, but we did have to do some cleanup. There were some underground storage tanks, and so we have to get a full bill of health on the project, a clean bill of health. Design development, we worked with HHL architects based in Buffalo on this project. And so I worked very closely with the architect on all the design. We vetted the floor plans, we vetted all the plans, the materials, and then also construction management and construction budget. And so I worked directly with our construction management company, Montante Construction, to make sure that we're staying true to the projected construction budget and making sure that the construction is on schedule. So 1299 Delaware, this is a project that we've been working on for quite a while. These are some renderings that you're looking at on the left and the right. We worked with a firm, BLTA Architects out of Philadelphia, on this project, and we really had a competitive RFP process that we released to architects. BLTA won. They were awarded the project. They've been fantastic. This project has full site plan approval from the city of Buffalo. It also has 100% construction documents, and this is the project that we're right now working on putting together the financing for. And once we've done that, this project will move forward, and as soon as it's more or less ready to go. So as soon as we're able to put the financing together, that'll move forward. In this project, we went through, as Bradshaw knows well, we went through a very robust community engagement process. The community actually was able to provide feedback. Our community advisory committee was able to provide feedback on our renderings throughout the whole design development process. So it's not as if they were designing the project, but we took their feedback. The architects were in the room with us and with the community, and a lot of the feedback that the community provided is reflected in the renderings and in the drawings that we see. And Lancaster Square Gate Circle. So the rest of the project, we have a lot of project concepts, and we've put together renderings, master plans, and project programs for all of these projects on site. And so each one of these is a different project that you're looking at from left to right. And these are all what we call LOD, lease option drawings, that were put together by the architect that we can shop out to potential tenants. And we can shop out to the community to make sure there's alignment for what we want to do on site. We also managed, I also managed the environmental due diligence and historic preservation consultants on other projects. There's 2 adaptive reuse components, so we've had to clean some asbestos, and we had to, you have to do an environmental phase 1 and phase 2, which is just making sure that the building is clean and there's no, life safety concerns with what exists. And then again, just collaboration with local public stakeholders. All the community members have seen these images. They're the first to see them before they are ready for public consumption. So, how did I get here? When I was a graduate student in the real estate development program, I loved it. I loved, financial analysis and structuring deals, but my background is in architecture and planning, and so I felt sort of creatively starved, where I wasn't in a studio. It was a happy coincidence that Tia Montante Development was putting together a design competition for the Gate Circle site. And so I put together a team of some students, one of my real estate students and an architecture student, and we responded. It was a 2-phase design competition. We were presented an initial concept and ultimately a finished product. So this is the hospital. This is what it looks like blank, and they said fill this in with what you think works on the site. So we put together a project that consisted of, I had very little background on the site, but it consisted of a fitness and wellness center, an urban market or grocery store, structured parking, townhomes, cafe, hotel, residential mixed use, and again, coincidentally, that was sort of the program that Tia Montante Development had in mind, and so they liked my team's presentation. We did not win, but we were finalists. The winning team had unbelievable renderings and fly-throughs and all this really aesthetically pleasing, awesome stuff that I was like, I give it to you guys. You guys did a really good job. Even though I didn't win, I was offered an internship with the company that summer. And so what I did was I led a team of the architects. The other team was 3 architecture students. And so I say led, but I mean, it sort of just organically happened that way. But we had a team where we advanced some of the concepts from our 2 winning submissions and put together proposals for the other projects on site. So these are renderings that we put together, as well as some urban planning analysis, transportation analysis on the site. Every week we would present our findings to the executive team at Tia Montante. They would give us feedback, and a lot of the findings that we put together during that summer internship were reflected in the RFPs for the various projects that have moved forward on site. I was offered at the end of that summer internship, when I was going into my second semester as a graduate in the real estate development program, a full-time job with Tia Montante. And so I was thrilled. I wanted to stay in Buffalo. This was great. I was able to draw, and I was able to design buildings, and I was also learning real estate development. So it all worked out really well. So now I started as an associate. I'm now a project manager. And what is project management as a developer? It's managing a team, it's managing project delivery and schedule, it's managing the design development process, performing initial financial analysis and budgeting, and also internal processes and planning. And so what's critical there is managing interpersonal relationships is essential to my job. I get phone calls from architects and vendors and contractors all the time, and I more or less am responsible for making sure that they're delivering on a daily basis. Which I don't mean that to say I'm like, an adult babysitter or anything like that, but these guys just have to make sure they're staying on schedule, because they all everybody's got a million projects going at once. So finding high quality players is essential. We put teams together, and when we work really well with a team member, they typically will work on us on other projects. And that's true of architects, engineers, lawyers, environmental consultants, historic preservation consultants. Our teams a lot of times work together, and so they've developed a good working relationship with not only us, but with one another. We design a project for maximum long-term value, meaning that we're not thinking about the user now, we're thinking about value. We own the building, and so when we're designing it, we're thinking about value 10 years from now. Is this building and is the space that we're designing going to be usable in 10 to 15 years? We balance quality and budget. Developers sort of have a bad reputation for value engineering and for stifling architects' creativity, and we strive to not do that. We strive to balance quality and bring quality to the table with budget in mind. Again, we're not going to retire after every one of our projects. Our margins aren't huge. But at the end of the day, again, we have to satisfy our lender because they're the ones who are paying for the project. We spend a lot of time planning. Because time spent on the front end will avoid conflict and problems on the back end. So we put together very robust, well thought out project plans and project proposals that we stay true to all the way through. We don't fly by the seat of our pants, and we don't make decisions in the field on the fly. We don't look at something and say change it. It's a very well thought out process that's documented. And flexibility and adaptability is key. Every single day on the job for me is different. Yesterday I received phone call after phone call. Bad news, bad news, bad news. The permit's taking forever. The subcontractor wants more money. He wants to come and sit down. And it's like after a while you want to just like go hide somewhere, but you can't. And then today was great. I went into the office for a little while this morning. It was easy. Now I'm here. So it's, and this is good. So flexibility and adaptability is key because as a project manager, even if you're working on the same project for 6 months, every single day will be different. So how I got here, my background is in architecture, urban planning, and historic preservation. So I studied architecture at Savannah College of Art and Design for 3 years. Savannah, for anybody who's been there, it's a really fun town, and it's not a town that's conducive to a 21-year-old trying to spend 12 hours a day in studio. So it was incomplete. I took some time in between. SCAD is what it's called. I took some time. I think this is the second to last slide. I took some time traveling, moved back to Buffalo. I got my bachelor's degree in environmental design with a focus on historic preservation. I actually worked with Carrie Trainer on the National Register nomination for Hayes Hall that we're in right now. So I spent a lot of time in here before and after. I then got my master's of architecture in real estate development. I was part of UB's inaugural RED class. And I'm currently affiliated with the Urban Land Institute as a chair of programming for ULI Western New York. So I put together all the programs and work with the various stakeholders to put together those programs. My last slide, I just want to talk a little bit about real estate development for anybody who's not familiar with the program. But it's SUNY's only advanced degree in real estate development. It's an opportunity. I think all of our professors are adjuncts professionals in the field. I actually work with a lot of them on a daily basis now as a peer. I was their student and now I'm their peer in the field, which is kind of cool. And the study ranges from financial structures to construction management, design development. It's very robust. And one of the best experiences I had was in my final semester, which was the first semester occupying one of the studios at the end of the hall here. We had a capstone project where we worked directly with M&T Bank on conceptualizing their downtown office space in Buffalo. My team I don't know if there's a winner or a loser, but we were asked by M&T Bank to present to them at their corporate headquarters downtown. So we were presented to Bob Wilmers and the executive team there, and put together what I consider and the rest of my team considers to be a pretty awesome project. That's one of our renderings down at the bottom. It was 571 East was the name of the project. And that's it. I hope that wasn't too
It's a plasma cutter and the 6-axis robotic arm or something like that. A big one and a small one, like a room one. But maybe there's a robot here. I don't know. But like the and then now this what's the name of the space? Smart space. Like I was just blown away, and to have that as an asset to kind of like realize projects that and faculty that's available to that's really important to take advantage of.
Yeah, I would say the culture of the school is really oriented towards doing things and making things, and I certainly felt empowered to basically do whatever I wanted. That's what my thesis was. I really did. And at Canisius was a much different situation for me because I was in political science and art history, and it was a very different culture of production and a different intellectual community too, much more conservative. And then Columbia, on the other side of the spectrum, was also an architecture school, but has a distinct culture where the work is often sort of self-similar. I think here you can foster more idiosyncratic projects. There's room for that. And then also at Columbia, I love Columbia. I love everyone that I worked with there, but it's also structured by, a system of privilege that doesn't admit a lot of people into it. And so often you're contending with people who go into the field to try and do work like maybe start their own firm, maybe work somewhere, but maybe also don't face the same challenges in terms of paying their rent in New York City. So that's one thing.
Go ahead. I'm trying to think of ways to put this and not offend anybody on any side. I feel like in my experience, the GSD was not a nurturing one. I don't think that's a place that you go to feel like you're brought into a community and have room to grow at your own rate and in your own way. I think what you learn, though, is that that's kind of up to you. Nobody's going to do that for you. For me, as you saw, that took, I think, quite a bit of time for me to figure that out. It wasn't until afterward that I think, came to that realization. I do think, though, what you do get there, though, is a much greater diversity of experience and exposure and opinions and ideas than certainly, at least for my undergrad experience, that I found over here. So that was the good and the bad, and cuts in both directions.
So just really quickly, the one thing that I found different from UB than from SCAD was UB is very entrenched in the community in a really good way. At SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, Savannah has this unbelievably rich architectural heritage, and we were designing skyscrapers and aquariums. Like, it had nothing to do with the time and the place for me. And I loved Savannah. I lived downtown. I would walk and I would take it in. And when I was designing, it had nothing to do with where I was. And at UB, that was totally different. I felt everything that I was doing at UB as an undergrad and as a graduate student was totally entrenched in the community. We were working directly with community stakeholders. We were designing projects that were perhaps in Buffalo. We were encouraged to study Buffalo's architectural heritage, which is on par with Savannah's. But that entrenchment in the community and that community involvement was something that I loved coming home to the Buffalo-Niagara region.
I agree with Dan.
And I went to UB for both degrees, so go Bulls.
That's absolutely right. And at TSD, they kind of discouraged that connection to community because of liability issues oftentimes. So it's really the student groups that were often trying to break the boundary between the school and community. School wouldn't do it voluntarily.
So when like certain UB students or like UB like upcoming future architects and other people that apply to your projects, your firms, your different offices, are you more like compelled, like when you see them, like are you like more attracted to that UB name, like when you see them, like is there like some sort of like attraction that you see from like other UB students, like to attend your firm, attend your projects, be involved in your different projects and so on?
I would certainly say that when you see a Buffalo name, when you see someone that has applied from Buffalo, you definitely have an idea of sort of like a material culture that you're assuming, that they bring a sensitivity to material and have like all the basic requisite skills. Like absolutely those things are in place and you can count on that. That's quite frankly like the first thing that would pop into my head thinking about it. And I do think that quite frankly there's a range of skills that an office needs and will look to have before, of course, they can hire anybody. And I would say that Buffalo does cover the bases. I haven't been on a review for a while in Buffalo. I'm hoping that things are still keeping up with the pace that was I think I found in my own experience. I actually would be curious to see some reviews. Hint.
I am not in a position to hire anyone.
Me neither.
I would say, yeah, definitely. I know that the undergrad and graduate programs, the environmental design and Masters of Urban Planning programs are really strong, and something that I came from, and I know that background that I received really helped me in my starting as a junior planner to lead me to Director of Planning and Development. So yeah, I'd say if someone was interested and they had that UB backing, that I would definitely enjoy interviewing them. And we are hiring, so if anyone's interested, please give me your contact.
We have a great relationship with UB. I'm a graduate, or development associates graduate. My boss, Chris, the president of the company, is on the advisory committee for the UB RED, the MS RED program. So definitely. I mean, we love UB students. We love bringing them in. We hire interns every summer. We will be hiring interns this summer. We're a very design-oriented development company. So if you're interested in real estate development, this is a shameless plug, but we are interested in talking with you.
And if you are looking for a federal position, you need to look at USA Jobs. That's where they're going to post. So.
And I'm going to be contrarian and just say, in the space of, just because I'm in the space of like diversity and inclusion and access to professions, there's actually a push to encourage blind, resumes, right? Like if we really we don't care about the brand, we want to understand you as a individual, your skill sets, and if you are a right fit for the job. And I think that that's something that you guys should all take into the spaces that you're going into to increase diversity and inclusion in the spaces that you're thinking about. Just a shameless plug.
Good point.
So I want to ask you what you would do to improve the programs in Buffalo. Did you have that? No.
Yes. What you would do to improve the programs in Buffalo.
So, I mean, one can talk about the good things of Buffalo, which is very encouraging you have. But, I mean, you also have the benefit of distance, and you can see that there are things that you would recommend we might do. So, microphone.
Now, I haven't looked at the MUP program and what classes are offered lately, but one class that I really would like to see, or maybe it's already being offered, is a grant writing class. I really am stressing the fact that from the private side and the public side and the nonprofit side, grant writing is huge, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that RED program is fairly young, and I've had a conversation with Mark Forrester about this before. The one thing I'd like to see them focus more on is honestly design. I came from a design background, and I was sort of an anomaly in the program having that design background. Now that I'm working in the field, and then I've moved my way up as a project manager, I work with designers every single day, architects, engineers, you name it, and the ability to read a set of construction drawings and to speak to an architect intelligently, speak their language is invaluable in the real estate development field. So I think that's something that the program, I know that they've been improving that slightly, but that's something that I'd like to see more of.
And I was going to say the same thing as Rebecca, the grant writing, it's just so important, even public sector, private sector, it's crucial. So I thought I had heard that there was a grant writing, but I don't know if it's in this department. No, not yet.
Speaking of grant writing, okay, so one thing that I could certainly say was just very glaringly a huge asset to my time when I was at Michigan, and that, of course, I was not a student. Of course, I was teaching, but I still think that I don't want to use this term, but there's some trickle down. So let me elaborate. The research and making program, and there were several others that were developed over there. provided a very generous reward for research, and it could be anything that the faculty wanted to put their time into, and it oftentimes brought in really talented students and then allowed students to develop skills working really closely with faculty in ways that you would never do in a classroom. Maybe that exists here. I have no idea. So maybe you're way ahead of me. But it was clearly a huge asset, and not only did it have some benefit to the students as they would get involved in these projects very closely, but then of course the faculty would produce research that became very, very easily publishable, and not just publishable in a periodical, but something that could get out into the world. And so it cycled back very quickly. It was so glaringly obvious that this was an incredible resource for the school. It didn't. Near as I understand, I don't think anything like that existed prior to something like, I don't know, I want to say like 2012 or something, 2010. And it was immediately obvious that there was this voice coming out of Michigan immediately from those resources. And it was being broadcast on a lot of channels that I saw.
And I guess I could, at the time when I left, it was like 2009. When I was looking for work, a lot of the applications were looking for people with programming experience, like programming languages, coders, for architecture jobs. And I thought that was curious, right? Like, why didn't I know about that? But now I think the resource of the Smart Lab, like Chris and Nick are doing, and I assume he's teaching a media class for freshmen, right? Like, that's super important to think about the integration of interactive mediums with architecture. Like, that spaces, the buildings are becoming a lot smarter, and where spaces need to be intelligent. Public space needs to be intelligent in all spaces.
I think for me, and maybe this has changed since I left the program, I was missing a level of criticality that I found in GSAP. I think often architecture is this kind of positivist project of realization that we forge toward some kind of product in the end, if it's a building or otherwise. And I don't think that there is a lot of space built into many architecture programs, but at Buffalo to question why we would do follow the brief of the studio, or I don't know, does the city need an opera house, or do we need to build a wall, Can I
build on that? That's a great point. Totally. One of the most shocking things for me, easily going from Buffalo to the GSD, was, the work is I'm not being applauded or approved. This is a different experience. I'm being criticized deeply for what I'm doing here, but it was a good thing. Like, it was a different level of criticism that I had no exposure to. Frankly, I didn't even know how to respond to forever. So it took me a very long time just to learn to adapt to that situation. But it was, I agree that there was some adaptation I had to do to understand, like, okay, how do I respond? What do I say when the ideas that I have, the design that I'm proposing, is not being received well? And do I agree or disagree? And should I question what they're saying?
Any other questions? Maybe if I may just ask one last one before we break up, but I was curious to what extent before you started your studies, and whatever degrees you took on, what the kind of practice that you thought you would have coming out of university, is that the kind of practice that you have now, and how is it different?
So, no, but while I was here, I was part of Beyond Patronage, and that was a kind of object lesson in, like, what you can do in architecture and how practices might be structured. And that happened like before I had even worked in an architecture office. Like I was already able to kind of give an analysis of the field as it is and what its limitations are, but also you know, what needs to be designed in order to make a practice happen. But I definitely still had to figure that out, and I'm still figuring it out. Yeah.
I think that, well, first of all, when I was an MEP, I did an environmental specialization. So I think I was probably thinking that I would go into something like that, maybe riverkeeper, but I don't think I knew at that time all the possibilities that a planning degree has. I mean, I didn't know really about nonprofits that did affordable housing, and it ended up being a field that I absolutely loved. So, I mean, I kind of fell into that. So, looking back, what was I thinking I was going to do? I mean, I did do an internship at the town of Clarence in their planning department, and I did one at the DOT. So I put my toes in those areas, but I don't know that I just felt lucky afterwards that I found the field that I really loved.
I would definitely say no, that when I was an MEP student, I didn't ever expect to be a director of planning and development for the city of Dunkirk. I think that once I got involved in the private sector, at first, working with a lot of different municipalities was great, and I was involved in so many things, but I really wanted to have that impact on one community. So finding this position as director of planning and development, finding it in a community that was situated on the waterfront was just that niche that I was looking for. But as an undergrad and in the MUP program, I didn't really know exactly what route I wanted to go yet. But it helped. Going in that private sector really helps me find that, because I was involved in so many different things.
When I was an architecture student, I was interested in custom residential. I have a cousin who's a home builder in Nantucket, and I always thought that was so cool that he's building these 5,000 square foot houses. That it's not for me. I went after. I was very interested in historic preservation as an undergrad, but there's too much writing, and that wasn't for me. Too much time in front of a computer screen. Honestly, this is going to sound like a joke, but before I actually was in the real estate development program, the only thing I knew about real estate development truly was like Donald Trump as a real estate developer. And at the time, that wasn't like a really bad thing, like it is for some people now. But I've found Tia Montante development, and the type of development, real estate development that we do, being very design oriented, very entrenched with the community. We're very in touch with the community, and we do sort of like holistic projects was an awesome fit. And so having very little background in real estate development, but loving planning and design, and also just working with people and being sort of like a very energetic, frenetic person. That's how I naturally am. Project management for a company like Tia Montante was a great fit. And so the fact that UB offers this program, and the fact that I found it in the inaugural class was a great fit for me.
I think I came in. I think I wanted to do what Dan does, but when I got to grad school and realized I was backing myself into kind of like this nebulous urbanist kind of like category. And there was a master of like architecture and urban design. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but I can't qualify for it because I don't have my first professional. But I think the act of like understanding what it is that you are proficient at early on was like is a skill, and you need people to trust you with things in order to kind of like assess those skills that you have, and the earlier that you're able to do that in profession or in your own, whatever your obsessions are, like it's helpful to weed through whether or not what you're currently going for a degree in is relevant to you, your professional goals.
As I'm trying to think about how to answer that, I'm also trying to think about the class that I graduated with, both here and at the GSD, and it's funny because it doesn't really feel like I have to process this because it's almost like a realization, like, oh no, it's like architecture feels, capital A architecture feels antiquated a little bit. Most of the people that I graduated with have had to find something else. I don't know if that's just the class that I was with, but honestly, most people are doing things that are parallel to capital A architecture, but are not capital A architecture. So I don't know what that means exactly, but it seems to imply some kind of flexibility. I acknowledge that what I do is certainly capital A architecture, but it absolutely has at times felt like this is true of any profession, this is true of any passion, this is true of any career, but just a push upstream. Is this the path forward? Is this really the way to go? And to answer your question, I suppose this is being recorded, right? We'll talk at dinner.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we'll take a few-minute break.